Hey everyone! Welcome back. Quick thanks to the patrons who keep this channel alive. Your requests are what I narrate next. If you want to join them, you can try Patreon free for 7 days, then it's starting with just $3 a month. Links in the description. Now, let's get into the story.
Early the next morning, Aris opened his eyes just as the first ray of sunlight touched the windowsill. He'd slept soundly, partly because Hogwarts was far safer than the world outside, and partly because he'd already sorted out his next steps the night before. The first thing, of course, was to set up his laboratory here as quickly as possible. The best spot was plainly the room of requirement. Then there was the magic array recorded in Merlin's notes. The research on that needed hurrying along too. That mysterious, marvelous array held powerful, highly malleable potential, and would surely help Aris accomplish, in time, a great many things the present wizarding world couldn't. The storage of spells, for one. As for his studies at Hogwarts, Aris had made a few plans there as well. With his current knowledge, there was no need for him to keep sitting through ordinary first-year lessons, which was exactly why he'd wanted Dumbledore's authorization for the library's restricted section the moment he arrived. But that would take the right opportunity. The professors wouldn't simply let him skip class. "Aris, get up, or you'll be late." Terry's voice came from outside the door. After a few knocks with no answer from within, he hurried off, evidently in a rush to reach the hall for breakfast. For first years, leaving plenty of time on the first day was genuinely wise. The staircases and the corridors often shifted, and it was easy to get lost if you weren't careful. Aris recalled that little Harry and Ronald had been late to their first class for exactly that reason. But Aris had no such worries. He knew the best way to find his path. That was to ask the people in the portraits for directions. Most of them were happy enough to help a first year along. Iris. Washed and ready, Aris summoned the little red dragon. Wah! A drowsy little cry sounded in the dormitory. Iris seemed still half asleep. Once summoned, she staggered a couple of steps across the bed before finally springing lightly into Aris's arms. "I've got class soon, so I might not be able to let you out this morning." Aris patted her head, explaining. "So, you can stay in the pet space for now, or go out and play a while, then find a chance to come see me at noon." The little dragon seemed much more awake now. She turned to look out the window and let out another wah. "Of course you can go and play, but remember to stay hidden, and don't appear in front of any other creatures, intelligent ones especially." "Understood." The little dragon's eyes lit up, and she nodded again and again. "Off you go." Aris raised his hand with a smile, set her on the windowsill, and opened the window. Wah! Iris leapt and shot into the air in an instant. Then her figure melted into thin air, gone from Aris's sight in the blink of an eye. Through his bond with her, though, he could feel clearly that the little one was, in fact, flying toward the forbidden forest. A bad feeling settled over Aris. That little troublemaker won't cause a mess, will she? The forbidden forest isn't safe. But then he thought of Iris's strength and relaxed. If she's the one going in there, it's the magical creatures I ought to be worried about. Leaving the dormitory, Aris reached the hall without trouble. It was just as Anthony had said. The moment he walked in, he felt a great many eyes turn his way. The students hadn't forgotten his stunning display at the feast the night before. Some of those looks were full of admiration, some of curiosity, and some of pure disdain and envy. Aris paid them all no mind. He glanced around and, sure enough, just like in the original story, saw no sign of Harry or Ronald. Those two are probably still asleep, or stuck on some shifting staircase. "Aris." A pleasant girl's voice came from behind. He turned to find Cho Chang standing there, smiling sweetly. "Good morning, Cho." The two greeted each other, and Cho sat down beside him. "Your first class should be with Professor Flitwick, right?" she asked. With Hufflepuff, I think." Aris nodded. The Hogwarts timetable paired the 4 houses at random. Usually 2 houses took a class together. Which two houses shared each day's lessons was entirely random, announced on the schedule the day before. The stated reason was to build cohesion among the four houses, though the results, so far, hadn't been much to speak of. Gryffindor and Slytherin had always been sworn enemies, while Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff simply kept to themselves. And the root of it was the same, the differing temperaments of each house's students. Professor Flitwick has a lovely temperament and no end of patience. You've nothing to worry about. After that, Cho kindly filled Aris in on the personalities of several of the school's professors, and what to watch for in dealing with each. Aris knew most of it already, but he listened patiently to the enthusiastic older student all the same. After all, she meant well. Once he'd finished breakfast in the Great Hall, Aris went straight to the charms classroom. "Aris, over here." The moment he entered, Terry and Anthony waved him over. "Good morning." Aris greeted them with a smile and sat down beside them. Since the class was shared with Hufflepuff, he was, frankly, a little uninterested. There'd be none of the Gryffindor versus Slytherin sparks to liven things up. "I hear Professor Flitwick's very lenient with students from our house." "Lucky me, having him first," Terry said, smiling, a note of hope in his voice. "So, if we don't do well in this class, the professor shouldn't come down on us, right?" "Maybe," Anthony put in at just the right moment. "But I'm certain no first year can pull off a spell properly the very first time he touches it. So the professor's probably used to it. It is the first lesson, after all." Compared to Terry, Anthony was far more optimistic. Aris listened to the two of them with a smile, nodding now and then to show he agreed. Caught up in their chatter, neither noticed a short figure appear at the front of the room. "Quiet, please." Professor Flitwick gave his wand a light wave and, as if by magic, floated up into the air. "You may all know me. My name is Phileas Flitwick, you may call me Professor Flitwick. I'll be teaching charms to all first years. Now, your first charms lesson of the term is about to begin. Please open your books." As Flitwick spoke, the rustle of first years turning pages filled the room. Aris, meanwhile, watched the professor with a thoughtful look in his eyes. He hadn't forgotten that today's 3 daily quests still weren't done. "The first spell you'll learn is the levitation charm." At the front of the room, Professor Flitwick stood atop a stack of books, straining to see the students below. "Everyone, draw your wands, please. Remember, there are 2 crucial things when casting a spell, the wand movement, and reciting the incantation clearly. Some spells, of course, also require a strong intent behind them. The incantation for the levitation charm is, Wingardium Leviosa. Like so, swish, flick, and speak the words at the same time." As Flitwick went on explaining, the young wizards below began trying it out, waving their wands one after another. "There's a feather on the desk in front of each of you, you've all seen it, I'm sure. Now, try to make that feather float." The professor looked over the first years, already hard at work, with satisfaction, his eyes roving the room as he kept stressing the key points. "Hannah, be a bit more confident, and mind your wrist. Terry, say the incantation clearly, that's very important. And you, Anthony, try waving your wand a touch slower. I'm not asking you to swat anyone with it. Don't worry, everyone. I know this is difficult, but casting the very first spell of your life is bound to take a few twists and turns." As the young wizards gradually found their footing, Flitwick's patter came faster, until nearly every first year had been named. Then Terry's voice, faintly doubtful, cut in. "Professor, is this really that hard? And are you sure you have to say the incantation to make the feather float?" "What?" Flitwick turned, thrown for a moment. "Look at Aris, he plainly didn't cast anything, but his feather floated all the same." "Yes, I saw it too. Even his wand movement was half-hearted." Anthony chimed in. The two of them drew every eye in the room at once. Aris flipped awkwardly through the book on his desk and shot a helpless glance at the 2 loudmouths beside him. He genuinely hadn't spoken the incantation just now, though his wand movement had been perfectly correct. It was simply that the levitation charm was so trivial for him he'd slipped into non-verbal casting without thinking. He'd mastered the technique a week ago. Who'd have guessed that a moment's lapse would be caught by the two attention magnets beside him, and promptly reported to Professor Flitwick. "Professor, actually Aris made to say something to smooth over the strange mood in the room. Because right now everyone was staring at him in surprise, and some had even begun to doubt the professor. This wasn't the effect Aris wanted at all. If this professor were the petty sort, he'd surely hold a grudge against me. Perfect, an absolutely perfect levitation charm. To his surprise, Professor Flitwick seemed overjoyed. He gazed at the feather drifting under Aris's control, its arcs clean and precise, the feather moving like a dancer's arm, and praised it generously. For that flawless, very nearly perfect, levitation charm, 2 points to Ravenclaw. "Aris, how did you do it? You truly cast nothing at all." The surprise passed, and Flitwick had caught up, looking at Aris with genuine astonishment. Professor, actually. Aris was still working out how to explain that a first year had already mastered non-verbal casting. Beside him, the ever-conspicuous Terry piped up again. "Professor, I'm quite sure Aris didn't cast a spell." "Yes, I can vouch for it." Anthony, the other little loudmouth, hurried to confirm. "Well, I did use non-verbal casting." Aris gave up resisting, helpless. He'd originally thought to reveal his talents slowly, to give these professors time to adjust. But that plan plainly wasn't going to work now. Then again, better this way, perhaps. Maybe I'll earn the right to skip classes openly all the sooner. So it really was a non-verbal spell. Flitwick's eyes went wide, and he looked at Aris as if beholding a treasure. "Forgive me, Mr. Shafik, might you show me once more?" "Of course." Decision made, Aris no longer thought to hold back. He let the feather settle back onto the desk, cut off the flow of magic, then gently waved his wand through the casting motion. The next second, the feather rose lightly again and, just as before, traced one perfect arc after another above the classroom, before finally landing squarely on Terry's head, leaving him looking like he'd just bolted out of a henhouse. Well, a small punishment for his love of the spotlight. A genius. I've never seen a talent like it. Flitwick grew thoroughly excited at seeing Aris cast the silent levitation charm again with such ease. He hurried to the front and hopped atop his stacked books so all could see him, then declared, alight with excitement, "Aris here didn't recite the incantation, but that does not mean you can cast without it. This involves a far more advanced technique, one you'd normally only attempt after passing your OWLS. It's called non-verbal casting. It's incredible, Aris has given me quite the surprise. I've never seen so outstanding a student. Even Professor Dumbledore, acknowledged as the finest genius in Hogwarts history, mightn't have managed this at his age. An achievement like this is simply unheard of." The young wizards looked from the ecstatic Professor Flitwick to Aris, who wore his usual polite smile, and didn't quite know how to react. In fact, Aris was a little mortified just then. How could I not be praised this lavishly, in front of this many people? Some even saying I'm stronger than Dumbledore. This is a heavy crown to wear. It feels like standing in the middle of a Muggle schoolyard with every teacher and student watching, and a loudspeaker beside me broadcasting my great deeds. This is a full-on public mortification scene. Professor, if you want to praise me, couldn't it wait until after class, in your office? Then it wouldn't be quite so mortifying. After a while, the young wizard seemed to come to, and their gazes at Aris turned positively fervent, as if they might eat him alive. Faintly chilling. Aris, you're amazing. Can you teach me how you did that? Mark my words, he'll be a standout figure at Hogwarts for the next 7 years. Merlin's beard, a talent greater than the great headmaster Dumbledore. How is that possible? It's incredible. Professor Flitwick watched Aris, hemmed in by the crowd, and the excitement in his eyes slowly hardened into resolve. In that moment he'd secretly made up his mind, I must report this to the headmaster at once, and see that Aris is given focused cultivation from now on. Perhaps the wizarding world will one day have a second Dumbledore, or a figure greater still. And such a figure, from Ravenclaw. Recalling what Aris had said at the feast the night before, an idea suddenly flashed through Flitwick's mind. Maybe this boy really can do it. At the end of the lesson, Professor Flitwick made a point of keeping Aris back for a few private questions. Only then did he reluctantly let him go, still clearly wanting more. Of course, the professor never dreamed that from the moment class began, he'd unwittingly become the target Aris had chosen for his daily quest. Professor Flitwick, I have a small question I'd like to ask. Just as Flitwick was about to release him, Aris seized the moment to speak. Go ahead, ask whatever you like. Flitwick, plainly delighted with this exceptional student, could hardly have been more accommodating. It's this. I've noticed that a spell's power seems tied to the caster's magical strength, their proficiency, and the wand they use. So I was wondering, is there any way to make the same spell even more powerful? Aris asked, appearing curious. The question thrilled Flitwick, and he explained it to Aris in earnest, in great detail. Congratulations, daily quest progress January 3rd. 200 academic points obtained. Listening to the systems chime in his mind, Aris nodded, feigning sudden enlightenment now and then, while Flitwick, seeing Aris hanging on his every word, grew happier the more he talked, until he'd told him no end of things. By the time Aris left the charms classroom, a full 20 minutes had passed. Flitwick had answered a single question of Aris's for 20 whole minutes, testament to just how deep the professor's knowledge ran. The next class was Transfiguration. The instant Aris entered the Transfiguration classroom, he was met with a distinctly complicated look from Professor McGonagall. Recalling the nature of magic question he'd twice put to her, still unanswered, Aris couldn't help a small twinge of guilt. Everyone, settle down. McGonagall stood at the front, wand in hand, her manner grave as always. In Transfiguration you will learn how to turn one object into another. I must warn you all, this is among the most complex and dangerous magic you will study at Hogwarts. Anyone caught fooling about in my class will be asked to leave, and not permitted to return. The stern warning made the young wizards go quiet all at once, none daring to slack off. Then McGonagall gave a light wave of her wand, and the desk before her transformed into a pig, then back into a desk. The sight drew gasps of amazement from the young wizards, and their interest in Transfiguration soared at once. But when McGonagall told them they wouldn't be turning a desk into a pig for a good while yet, and set them to their real first task, turning a match into a needle, most of the young wizards deflated on the spot. Compared with the professor's marvelous demonstration, this dull little exercise was nowhere near enough to satisfy them. Wow, Professor McGonagall's Transfiguration is amazing. But turning a match into a needle sounds so boring. Hey, isn't Aris in this class? Bet he could turn the desk into a pig same as the professor. You're right. Aris is incredible, Professor Flitwick praised him to the skies last class. The young wizards, robbed of their fun, turned their eyes to Aris, clearly hoping he'd give them another eye-opening show, the way he had in charms. Under all those expectant looks, Aris frowned faintly, then relaxed again. He'd meant to keep a lower profile in McGonagall's class, things still weren't quite settled between them, and he'd no wish to add to the awkwardness. But the young wizard's eager gazes made lying low rather difficult. Quiet, all of you. As the muttering spread and the young wizards grew restless, McGonagall's face darkened, and she rapped the desk to bring the room to order. Silence fell. But the young wizard's eyes still drifted, again and again, toward Aris. McGonagall naturally noticed. Something flickered across her face, she'd caught wind, of course, of the stir Aris had caused in charms. Word that a first year had performed non-verbal casting had spread through the school in no time, McGonagall would have had to be deaf and blind to miss it. As one of the most accomplished witches at Hogwarts, and a transfiguration master, she'd been quietly astonished herself when she first heard. But she'd said nothing, for that same nature of magic business still stood unresolved between her and Aris, and it left her feeling rather awkward around the boy. Aris. After a brief hesitation, McGonagall spoke. If she simply carried on ignoring him, those restless young wizards likely wouldn't settle down to the lesson at all. Yes, Professor. Aris straightened at once. I heard that in Professor Flitwick's class earlier, you performed nonverbal casting. McGonagall asked, her tone carrying the sternness peculiar to her. Since your talent is so exceptional, why don't you come to the front and demonstrate this match-to-needle transfiguration for everyone? McGonagall had her own reasoning. If she let Aris show his skill, then satisfied the young wizard's curiosity, they might actually knuckle down afterward. And there was another motive she kept to herself. Like everyone else, she wanted to see for her own eyes just how extraordinary this student really was. Nonverbal casting was one thing, but she wanted to know whether Aris could truly manage a transfiguration too. If he could, then this student was gifted almost beyond reason. Of course, given the boy's showing in charms, and how the Sorting Hat carried on about him, he ought to have real talent for transfiguration as well. McGonagall thought to herself, watching Aris head to the front, a flicker of anticipation in her eyes despite herself. All right, Professor. Aris didn't refuse. Since McGonagall had asked him to demonstrate, he'd no reason to say no, and getting on her good side wouldn't hurt his chances of finally prying that answer out of her either. Reaching the front, Aris drew his wand, glanced at the match on the desk, and gave it a light tap. The match transformed at once into a fine silver needle, gleaming under the light. The whole thing looked effortless, as though he weren't casting an advanced transfiguration at all, but performing the simplest trick in the world. The moment Aris finished the transfiguration, the whole classroom fell silent. Professor McGonagall walked over, picked up the silver needle Aris had transformed, and examined it carefully. The needle was flawless, fine and sharp, with a clean, even sheen, not the faintest trace of a match left about it. This was a perfect transfiguration, one that even many senior students would struggle to bring off. She'd expected Aris to have talent, yes, but not that he'd pull off so flawless a transfiguration on his very first attempt. A perfect transfiguration. 5 points to Ravenclaw. McGonagall set the needle down, and though her expression stayed composed, the astonishment in her eyes couldn't be hidden. At her verdict, the classroom erupted. Aris really did it. Amazing, that was every bit as good as the professor's. As expected of the wizard Professor Flitwick praised so highly. The young wizard's eyes on Aris grew more fervent still. Even the Hufflepuff students shared in the class's collective pride. After all, an outstanding wizard had appeared among this year's first years, and the news would surely spread through the whole wizarding world before long. Quiet down, all of you. McGonagall rapped the desk again, bringing the room to order, then looked at Aris. Aris, that was very well done. But this is Transfiguration class, I still hope you'll listen carefully. There's a great deal about Transfiguration you've yet to learn. Of course, Professor. I'll pay close attention. Aris nodded sincerely. He knew perfectly well McGonagall meant this kindly. However gifted he was, at present he'd only mastered a portion of the first-year material. There was still a vast amount of magical knowledge waiting for him to learn. Good. Then return to your seat. McGonagall nodded, a shade of relief in her eyes. She'd worried Aris might grow complacent for having a little talent, but plainly her worry had been unnecessary. His attitude toward learning, in fact, was better than that of nearly every other student. As Aris returned to his seat, the young wizards finally settled and began, in earnest, to attempt turning their own matches into needles. Aris, meanwhile, kept his word and started reading through the Transfiguration textbook properly, quickly finding a good deal in it he hadn't known before. Before long, he was thoroughly absorbed. The class carried on smoothly. Now and then McGonagall would step down to guide the young wizards, correcting their wand movements or their grasp of the theory. When she passed Aris's desk, she couldn't help slowing, a little curious what he was doing, and found the boy frowning over the textbook, plainly deep in thought. Something flickered across her face. This child really is a natural-born wizard. Then she moved on to guide the others. At the end of the lesson, just as the young wizards were filing out, Aris made his way over to McGonagall. "Professor McGonagall, I have a question I'd like to ask." The moment class ended, Aris took his chance and approached her. McGonagall's expression turned instantly wary. "Aris, if it's that same question again, I'm afraid I still haven't the answer for you." No, it's a different question this time." Aris shook his head quickly. "Oh, then go ahead." McGonagall let out a small breath of relief, then nodded for Aris to continue. "It's this. I've read a little about animagi in books, and I find the subject fascinating. So I wanted to ask, how does one become an animagus?" Aris asked, all curiosity. At the question, McGonagall's eyes lit up. This happened to be something she knew a great deal about. She herself was a registered animagus, able to transform into a cat, so no topic could have suited her better. To become an animagus is no simple matter. The process is complex, and carries no small danger. McGonagall began explaining to Aris in earnest, detailing the requirements and steps of becoming an animagus, along with a number of cautions. She even offered a few pointers on the human transfiguration knowledge involved. "Congratulations, daily quest progress February 3rd. 300 academic points obtained." Listening to the systems chime in his mind, Aris nodded along, feigning revelation now and then, while McGonagall, seeing his rapt attention, grew ever more forthcoming. In truth, Aris knew a fair amount about animagi already. But hearing McGonagall lay out the details so systematically, he did pick up a few things he hadn't known. That was one of the perks of the daily quest. To complete it, he had to consult others, and in doing so, he often gained knowledge he'd have had trouble finding on his own. "Thank you, Professor McGonagall, I understand now." Once she'd finished, Aris thanked her sincerely. "It's good that you're keen to learn, but the transfiguration involved in becoming an animagus is very advanced. It isn't something you should attempt yet." Perhaps fearing Aris might rush off to try it himself, McGonagall added a careful warning. "Don't worry, Professor, I understand." Aris nodded. Only then did McGonagall nod, satisfied. But just as Aris turned to leave, she seemed to remember something and called him back. "Aris, wait a moment. Is there something else, Professor?" Aris turned back, puzzled. McGonagall hesitated a moment, then said, a little awkwardly, "About that question of yours, the nature of magic. I truly haven't found the answer yet. But I promise you, I'm already looking into it. So, please, don't be too anxious about it." Hearing this, Aris couldn't help a small smile. So the professor really had taken his question to heart, she was studying it in earnest. "It's all right, Professor. Take your time. I trust you'll give me a satisfactory answer one day." McGonagall nodded, and only when she saw Aris walk off did she let out a long breath, a wry, helpless smile crossing her face. This child really does hold on to things. Well, I did promise him. I suppose I've no choice but to see it through. Once he'd left the Transfiguration classroom, Aris headed to the Great Hall for lunch. On the way, he ran into Harry and Ronald, who were hurrying along in the opposite direction, looking thoroughly harried. "Aris." The two spotted him and came over. "Where are you two off to in such a rush?" Aris asked, a little puzzled. "Don't ask." Ronald wore a bitter face. "We got lost this morning and were late to Professor McGonagall's class. She was furious, nearly took house points off us. This afternoon we're determined not to be late again, so we're going to scout the route ahead of time." You got lost too. Aris couldn't help a small laugh. Sure enough, just as in the original story, these two had run into trouble with the shifting staircases their very first morning. It's not funny. Ronald protested. Those staircases move about on their own, how's anyone supposed to find their way? We nearly ended up in the girls' dormitory. That does sound like a bit of an adventure. Aris nodded gravely, though the corner of his mouth kept twitching. By the way, Aris, I heard you did something incredible in charms this morning. Harry cut in, eyes shining. Everyone's been talking about it. They say you cast a spell without even speaking the incantation. It was nothing, really. Aris waved it off. Nothing. Ronald's eyes went wide. I heard even Professor Flitwick was stunned. He said you might be more talented than Professor Dumbledore was at your age. People do like to exaggerate. Aris smiled and shook his head. All right, you two had best go and scout your route, or you'll be late again. We can talk more at dinner. You're right. Harry and Ronald exchanged a look, said a hurried goodbye to Aris, and rushed off again. Watching the two of them dash away, Aris shook his head, amused, and made for the Great Hall. After lunch came the afternoon's classes. Aris's first that afternoon was History of Magic. History of Magic was, without exception, the class the young wizards found dullest. The reason was simple: the professor who taught it, Cuthbert Binns, was a ghost, and a monotonous one, who did nothing but drone on and on about historical events in a flat, lifeless voice. It was more than enough to put the whole class to sleep. Sure enough, no sooner had the lesson begun than Professor Binns started reciting historical dates and the names of various goblin rebellions in that dull, droning tone, without the slightest fluctuation. Before long, more than half the young wizards had begun to nod off. Aris, though, listened with unusual attention. Not because he found the material interesting, but because History of Magic happened to hold a great deal of knowledge he needed. Understanding the history of the wizarding world would be a real help in coming to grips with this world of magic. Of course, there was another reason: he still had his third daily quest to complete. Professor Binns. Just as the ghostly professor droned on about a certain goblin rebellion, Aris raised his hand. The whole class was startled. In History of Magic, students who weren't asleep were usually off in their own daydreams. Almost no one ever actively asked a question. Even Professor Binns himself seemed taken aback, pausing his lecture to look, through his spectacles, in the direction of the voice. You have a question? Binns' voice carried a note of surprise. It had likely been a very long time since a student last raised a hand in his class. Yes, Professor. Aris nodded. I'd like to ask, in all these goblin rebellions, what was the root cause of the conflict between goblins and wizards? And is there any hope of truly resolving it? The question seemed to strike a chord with Binns. His eyes brightened, and he began, at length, to explain to Aris the deep-seated roots of the goblin-wizard conflict. Congratulations, daily quest completed. 300 academic points obtained. At the system's chime, Aris nodded along, feigning revelation now and then, while Professor Binns, plainly delighted to meet a student genuinely interested in history, grew ever more animated, until his droning lecture had, against all odds, taken on a spark of life. The other young wizards, jolted awake by the exchange, watched the scene in a daze, utterly unable to understand how anyone could find History of Magic interesting enough to actively ask a question. In their eyes, Aris grew more and more of a mystery. With the third daily quest done, Aris had banked a fair sum of academic points today. He opened his panel for a look, and found he'd amassed nearly 1,000 points across the day. It seemed asking the professor's questions really was the most efficient way to farm points. Each of their answers was thorough, and the rewards generous to match. At this rate, I'll have enough for a magic potion before long. Aris was quietly pleased. A magic potion could permanently raise his magic power, precisely what he needed most just now to grow stronger, faster. The afternoon's classes passed, on the whole, without incident. After history of magic came herbology, taught by Professor Sprout, the kindly head of Hufflepuff. Aris, naturally, didn't forget to store away several bits of knowledge he could use, though he'd already used up his 3 daily quests, so there was no reward to be had for it. By the time the day's lessons ended, dusk had fallen. Aris didn't head straight to the Great Hall for dinner, instead he made for a certain corridor on the 7th floor. There, he was going to see about setting up his own laboratory, in the Room of Requirement. The Room of Requirement was one of the most mysterious places in all of Hogwarts. It would appear only when someone truly had need of it, and it took whatever form the seeker required. That was exactly why Aris had settled on it as the site of his laboratory. Reaching the 7th floor corridor, Aris stopped before a stretch of blank wall. He drew a deep breath, then paced back and forth before it 3 times, silently picturing in his mind the laboratory he wanted. I need a place to conduct magical experiments, with a potions workbench, alchemical apparatus, wand-making tools, and space to study magic arrays. As Aris finished his 3rd pass, a great door slowly took shape on the once blank wall. He pushed it open, and inside was exactly the laboratory he'd imagined, everything laid out just so, wanting for nothing. The Room of Requirement really is a marvel. Aris looked over the fully equipped laboratory, deeply satisfied. Setting up a lab here would save him no end of trouble, better still, its secrecy was ideal, no one would find it, so long as he didn't wish to be found. He wasted no time and set to arranging things. The various experimental materials and equipment Henry had gathered, along with the props he'd bought himself, he took from his enchanted bag one by one and laid out neatly about the lab. Before long, an orderly, well-stocked magical laboratory had taken shape. Perfect. From now on, this is my very own little world. Aris nodded, thoroughly pleased. The first thing he did was summon Iris out of the pet space. The little red dragon, freshly out, gave a lazy stretch, then looked around the unfamiliar surroundings, curious. This is our new base. From now on, you can play here freely. Aris stroked her head and explained. Just remember, don't touch any of the experimental materials without asking. Some of them are dangerous. Iris nodded, human as ever, then flapped her little wings and went off to explore her new home. Watching the little dragon flit happily about the lab, Aris smiled, then turned his mind to more serious matters. He had 2 things to research now: first, the meditation method the system had rewarded him, and second, the magic array recorded in Merlin's notes. Aris chose to begin with the meditation method. He'd already studied the meditation method skill book in detail, and grasped the technique's essentials. Now it was time to put theory into practice. He found a clear space in the lab, sat down cross-legged, closed his eyes, and slowly emptied his mind, guiding his magic to circulate through his body by the method the book described. Before long, a subtle warmth rose within him, and his magic began to flow, quiet and orderly, along the paths he'd set. As Aris sank deeper into the meditative state, he could feel his magic growing calmer, purer, and his control over it steadily surer. This was exactly the effect the meditation method was meant to have, raising his magic value bit by bit, strengthening his control, and settling the very properties of his magic. Aris held the meditation a full hour before slowly opening his eyes. He checked his panel and found his magic value had risen by a single point, a slow gain, but a steady one, and better still, it needed no cost in points, only time. If he kept at it daily, over the long run the benefits would be considerable. This meditation method really is a fine thing. Aris nodded, pleased. I'll have to keep it up every day from now on. With the meditation seen to, Aris turned to the magic array in Merlin's notes. This was the research he cared about most. If he could master the spell-storing magic array recorded in those notes, he'd be one step closer to building his auto-casting wand, a wand that could, like a firearm, unleash a preset spell at the flip of a switch. That would be a genuinely powerful trump card. But the magic array was extraordinarily complex, and the notes didn't spell out its precise method of construction. Inscribing a true array required guiding it with magic power, and the exact technique for that had to be worked out through Aris's own study and repeated trial. He spread a sheet of special parchment across the workbench, drew his wand, and, following the array diagram recorded in Merlin's notes, began carefully guiding his magic to trace the pattern onto the parchment. The work demanded intense concentration and exquisite control of magic. The slightest slip in guiding the power would ruin the whole array. Fortunately, Aris's control was more than equal to it, and with his meditation practice, it had grown steadier still. Time slipped by little by little. Aris was wholly absorbed in inscribing the magic array, oblivious to everything around him. Even Iris, tired now from her exploring, had curled up quietly in a corner and fallen asleep, careful not to disturb her master's work. By the time Aris finished tracing a small section of the array, a good deal of time had passed. He wiped a faint sheen of sweat from his brow and looked at his handiwork with some satisfaction. Though he'd only completed a small portion, and there was no telling yet whether it would actually work, it was a start, and a good one. Just then, his stomach gave a low, untimely growl. Only then did Aris realize he'd missed dinner entirely, so lost in his research that he'd forgotten the hour. He checked the time. The dinner hour in the great hall was long past. Looks like I overdid it a bit. Aris smiled ruefully and shook his head. He put away the parchment with the half-finished array, careful not to damage it, then summoned Iris, who woke from her nap looking thoroughly aggrieved, back into the pet space. All right, let's head back. We'll continue tomorrow. Aris took one last look around the laboratory, then turned and walked out of the room of requirement. That same evening, in the headmaster's office, Professor Flitwick had come to see Dumbledore in some excitement, to report Aris's astonishing showing in class that day. Headmaster, you truly must see this child for yourself. In all my years teaching charms, I have never met a student so gifted. Flitwick's voice trembled slightly with feeling. A perfect nonverbal levitation charm, on his very first charms lesson. Do you understand what that means? Even the most brilliant students only begin attempting nonverbal casting after their OWLS. And he's a first year, barely through the door. I know, Phileas. I know. Dumbledore nodded slowly, a complicated look behind his half-moon spectacles. He'd had a long talk with Aris the night before, so the boy's talent came as no surprise. What weighed on him was something else entirely. And that's not all. Flitwick pressed on eagerly. Professor McGonagall tells me that in her transfiguration class today, Aris performed a flawless match-to-needle transfiguration on his very first try. Headmaster, charms and transfiguration, both mastered at a stroke. A talent like this. I truly cannot find the words for it. I understand your excitement, Phileas. Dumbledore rose and walked slowly to the window, gazing out at the night-shrouded castle. But I hope you'll bear one thing in mind. Talent is a fine thing, but character matters more. What we ought to give the most thought to now is how to guide this child well, so his gifts are put to the proper use. Of course, Headmaster, you're quite right. Flitwick nodded again and again. But I truly believe that if Aris is properly cultivated, the wizarding world may one day gain a great wizard, perhaps even one to rival you, Headmaster. Dumbledore said nothing to that. He only gazed out at the deep night beyond the window, his eyes unreadable. Flitwick's words had, in fact, stirred him more than he let on, because he'd thought as much himself. But precisely because he had, a faint unease stirred in him too. He'd seen too many gifted wizards walk crooked paths for want of proper guidance. The lesson of his old friend Grindelwald was still fresh in his mind. Phileas, I understand your meaning. After a long silence, Dumbledore spoke at last. Let us give this child a little more time, and more attention. But remember, our task is to guide him, not to force him. Every child has his own path to walk. What we can do is ensure he doesn't lose his way. I understand, headmaster. Flitwick nodded earnestly. After Flitwick had gone, Dumbledore stood a long while at the window before finally letting out a soft sigh. This child, he really is too much like Gellert was, in his younger days. The same brilliance, the same ambition, the same longing to change the world. I only hope he doesn't walk the same road Gellert did. A few days later, at a Hogwarts staff meeting, Aris became the focus of every professor's discussion. That Aris Shafik really is a marvel. In my charms class he's grasped nearly every first-year spell, I can hardly find anything left to teach him. Flitwick spoke first, his tone full of praise and no small helplessness. The same in Transfiguration. His grasp of the theory is astonishing, and his casting near flawless. Professor McGonagall nodded in agreement. The trouble is, he's so far ahead of the other students that the ordinary lessons plainly can't satisfy him anymore. In my herbology class he's much the same, knowledgeable, and quick to pick up whatever I teach. Professor Sprout added her piece. The child's talent for learning is simply extraordinary. Believe it or not, he even asks questions in my class. A dull, droning voice cut in, Professor Binns, the history of magic teacher. In all my years teaching, he may be the very first student to take an active interest in history of magic. His questions are sharp, too. It's a genuine pleasure. At Binns' words, the other professors traded looks of surprise. They all knew perfectly well what history of magic was like, that a student would actively ask questions in that class was news indeed. It seems this Aris really is no ordinary child. A cold voice spoke up from the corner. It belonged to Snape, the potions master, who'd been silent till now. But talent alone means nothing. Whether he can walk the right path in the end, that remains to be seen. Snape's words gave the other professors pause. They knew he had a point. However gifted Aris was, he was still only an 11-year-old boy, how he'd turn out, no one could yet say. Severus is right. Dumbledore, seated at the head of the table, finally spoke, bringing the discussion to a close. Talent is worth treasuring, but guidance matters more. From now on, I hope every one of you will give Aris a little extra care, but do not neglect the other students on his account. Every child deserves our attention equally. Understood, headmaster. The professors nodded. As the meeting ended and the others filed out, Dumbledore called Professor Quirrell back. Only after everyone else had gone did he look at the turbaned professor and ask, unhurried, Quirinus, what do you make of this child? This child, headmaster. Professor Quirrell seemed a little surprised at the question. He thought a moment, then answered in his stammering way. He's certainly gifted. But I don't know him well enough to say much more. Is that so? Dumbledore regarded him meaningfully over his half-moon spectacles, then smiled. It's nothing. I was merely curious what a younger professor might make of him. Off you go, then, Quirinus, mind you don't overwork yourself. Thank you for your concern, headmaster. Quirrell nodded, then turned and left the office. Dumbledore watched the turbaned figure go, and the smile slowly faded from his eyes. He'd sensed, of late, that something about Quirrell was subtly amiss, though he couldn't yet put his finger on what. He'd asked after Aris just now partly to gauge Quirrell's reaction. And that reaction had only deepened his misgivings. I'll have to keep a closer watch on him, Dumbledore thought, his gaze turning grave. Meanwhile, Quirrell had returned to his own quarters. The moment the door closed, a cold, sinister voice issued from beneath his turban. That old fool suspects something. My lord, what should we do? Quirrell's voice had lost all its earlier stammer, replaced now by a fearful deference. There's no need to panic. He has no proof. The cold voice paused. That boy, though, Aris Shafik. Tell me more about him. He's a first year, my lord, but astonishingly gifted. The professors can talk of nothing else. Quirrell reported carefully. And he's the last heir of the Shafik family, a house of enormous wealth. The Shafik family. The cold voice sank into thought. One of the sacred 28. I'd heard that line was all but extinct. To think an heir would surface now. A hint of interest crept in. And you say the boy is remarkably gifted? Yes, my lord. Even Dumbledore, it said, thinks highly of him. Interesting. Truly interesting. The cold voice carried a chill smile. A gifted boy, and a vast fortune besides. If I could win him to our side, he might prove no small help to my return. My lord means to. Quirrell seemed to grasp something. For now, watch him. Learn all you can. The cold voice was calm, unhurried. There's no rush. When the time is right, I'll have my own way of making him serve me. Yes, my lord. I understand. Quirrell bowed his head in submission. Little did they know that the boy they schemed over had, from their very first meeting, marked Quirrell as a threat to watch, and guessed at the danger hidden beneath that turban. Aris's days at Hogwarts settled into a steady rhythm. Each morning he rose early to meditate, tempering his magic and slowly raising his magic value. Then he'd attend his lessons, never forgetting to farm his 3 daily quests off the professors, reaping both knowledge and academic points in the bargain. In his free hours he'd shut himself away in the room of requirement, pressing on with his research into the magic array, drawing closer bit by bit to the autocasting wand he envisioned. Naturally, he didn't forget Luna either. Every few days he'd have Iris carry a letter to her, and Luna always wrote back at length, telling him of everything happening at home, and, of course, complaining now and then that he'd gone off to Hogwarts and left her behind. Each time he read her letters, Aris couldn't help a smile, and quietly resolved to bring her to Hogwarts to see him when the chance arose. His magic grew stronger by the day. With his meditation practice, and the steady points he banked from his daily quests, his magic value climbed without pause. Before long, he'd saved enough to redeem a magic potion from the points shop, raising his magic value on the spot and pushing his strength up another notch. His research into the magic array advanced as well. Though the going was slow, and setbacks many, Aris never once thought of giving up. He knew that once he cracked this array, his strength would take a genuine leap, and he'd hold a trump card the present wizarding world simply couldn't match. His name, too, was spreading fast through the school. The tale of the first year who could cast non-verbally, and who'd matched the professor's own displays at every turn, had swept through Hogwarts. Wherever Aris went, he drew stares of admiration and curiosity in equal measure. To all of it he stayed calm as ever, taking the attention in stride and letting none of it disturb his own steady progress. Of course, that kind of fame brought trouble as well. Some, out of jealousy, tried to make things difficult for him, others, with schemes of their own, sought to draw close and win his favor. But Aris handled every one of them with ease. His strength, and his composure, ensured no petty trouble could touch him. Draco Malfoy, in particular, ever since being tamed by Aris on the train, had grown far more restrained, and even, now and then, would deliberately seek Aris out to curry favor. Aris knew perfectly well the boy's designs, but he wasn't fussed. Handled rightly, Draco might yet prove a useful piece when the time came to deal with the Malfoy family. And so, in this steady, purposeful way, Aris's life at Hogwarts rolled on, until, before he knew it, Halloween had quietly arrived. Halloween was one of the grandest festivals in the wizarding world, and Hogwarts always marked it with great ceremony. That evening, the Great Hall was decorated with a festive splendor. Thousands of live bats fluttered across the walls and ceiling, still more swept in great flocks above the tables, making the candle flames gutter and dance. Enormous carved pumpkins sat everywhere, each large enough for 3 grown men to climb inside, glowing with a warm orange light. The whole hall was steeped in a rich holiday air. The tables groaned under every kind of delicacy, and the young wizards ate and chatted with abandon, the mood merry and warm. Aris sat at the Ravenclaw table, chatting idly with Terry and Anthony as he ate. His gaze drifted, now and then, toward the Gryffindor table, where Harry and Ronald sat, and toward Hermione, who was, at that moment, nowhere to be seen. Something's not quite right, Aris thought. He remembered clearly that in the original story, this was the very night a troll broke into Hogwarts. And Hermione, upset over something, had shut herself in a bathroom crying, only for the troll to corner her there. He recalled that Ronald had said something cruel about Hermione that day, which had sent her off in tears. And the troll's intrusion nearly cost her her life. It was Harry and Ronald rushing to save her that finally forged the friendship among the three of them. Though the story was heading in a slightly different direction now that he'd arrived. Aris frowned faintly. He'd gotten to know Hermione, Harry, and Ronald early, so the friendship among the three might form differently than it had in the book. But the troll's intrusion, he judged, was unlikely to change. That had been Quirrell's doing, a diversion, set loose to draw the professors away so he could slip toward the third-floor forbidden corridor and the thing hidden there. Should I step in? Aris hesitated a moment, then decided against it. Hermione wasn't in real danger, Harry and Ronald would save her in time, just as in the story. And if he interfered rashly, he might disrupt the plot's own momentum, which could bring troubles of its own. Better to watch quietly, and step in only if something truly went wrong. Just as Aris was turning it over, the doors of the great hall burst open with a bang, and Professor Quirrell came sprinting in, his face a mask of terror. Troll! There's a troll, in the dungeons! Quirrell cried, gasping the words out. I thought you ought to know. And with that, he rolled his eyes back and crumpled to the floor in a dead faint. The hall erupted into chaos at once. The young wizard screamed and scrambled, some so frightened they nearly dove under the tables. Silence. At the head of the hall, Dumbledore stood, and with a wave of his wand sent several loud bangs cracking through the air, bringing the panicking students up short. Prefects, lead your houses back to the dormitories at once. The professors will come with me to the dungeons, Dumbledore ordered, calm and steady. At his command, the prefects of the 4 houses quickly began herding their students out of the hall. Aris rose with the Ravenclaw crowd and made to leave, but his eyes swept the room, and sure enough, Harry and Ronald had slipped away at some point. He knew perfectly well the 2 of them had gone to warn Hermione, who still had no idea a troll was loose in the castle. Looks like it's playing out just as the story went, Aris thought. He wasn't especially worried. He knew Harry and Ronald would get to Hermione in time and bring down the troll together. Still, to be safe, he quietly summoned Iris and sent the little dragon to keep watch over the 3 of them from the shadows, ready to step in the instant anything went truly wrong. Meanwhile, Professor Quirrell, supposedly fainted dead away on the floor, had, the moment no one was watching, cracked open one eye, a cold light glinting in it. Then he slipped quietly to his feet and stole off toward the 3rd floor. The troll, of course, had been his doing all along, a diversion to pull the professors down to the dungeons and clear his path to the thing hidden in the forbidden corridor. But what Quirrell never imagined was that his every move had, from the very start, been watched. Not by Dumbledore, but by a first year he'd never thought to guard against. Perched invisibly in a corner of the ceiling, the little red dragon Iris fixed her gaze on Quirrell's stealthily retreating figure, then, following the command her master had given through their bond, silently peeled away to trail him. Aris had sent Iris not only to watch over Hermione, but to keep an eye on Quirrell's movements. He wanted to know exactly what the man, and the master hidden beneath that turban, were truly after. Following her master's command, the little red dragon Iris trailed Quirrell all the way to a corridor on the 3rd floor. It was a stretch of passage plainly forbidden to students. Dumbledore had warned everyone at the start of term to keep away from the 3rd floor corridor on the right-hand side, on pain of death. Naturally, that only made Aris all the more curious about what lay hidden there. Quirrell stopped before a door, glanced warily about, then drew his wand and murmured a spell. The door swung slowly open, and he slipped inside. Perched invisibly at the corner of the ceiling, Iris silently followed him in. Beyond the door was a large chamber, and in the middle of it crouched an enormous, monstrous dog. The beast had 3 heads, each with a maw full of jagged fangs, and 6 eyes that glared, savage, at the intruder. The moment it caught Quirrell's scent, 3 throats loosed a thunderous, earth-shaking growl. Iris nearly gave a start, but she was, after all, a dragon of no ordinary bloodline, and quickly steadied herself, keeping perfectly still in her corner, watching Quirrell's every move. Quirrell, for his part, seemed to have come prepared. He drew a small flute from his robes and began to play. As the strange, drifting music filled the air, the 3-headed dog's savagery gradually ebbed, its 6 eyes grew heavy, and before long all 3 heads had slumped, and it sank into a deep sleep. Only then did Quirrell dare approach. He crept past the sleeping beast and made for a trapdoor set in the floor beneath it, clearly meaning to open it and reach whatever lay below. Watching from her corner, Iris relayed everything she saw to Aris through their bond. Far off in the Ravenclaw common room, Aris, having returned with the others, sat quietly in a chair, eyes closed, watching, through Iris's eyes, the scene unfolding on the 3rd floor. A Cerberus. And a trapdoor beneath it, Aris thought, opening his eyes, a thoughtful light in them. So the thing hidden on the 3rd floor really was guarded layer upon layer. The 3-headed dog was only the first line of defense. Below the trapdoor, there'd surely be more. He knew well enough what lay at the bottom of it all, the Philosopher's Stone, the legendary object that could turn any metal to gold and brew the elixir of life. It was exactly what Voldemort was after. With the stone, he could restore his body and return to power. So Quirrell means to test the way ahead tonight, Aris mused. He wasn't worried, though. He knew that even reaching the trapdoor, Quirrell wouldn't get the stone tonight. The protections below were the work of several professors together, and not something Quirrell could break through in one attempt. What Aris wanted was simply to understand the man's aims, and to keep abreast of the situation. Just as Quirrell bent to examine the trapdoor, hurried footsteps sounded outside. His face changed, he quickly stowed his flute, and before the 3-headed dog could wake, slipped out of the chamber and melted into the shadows of a nearby corridor. Moments later, Professor Snape appeared at the 3rd-floor corridor. He frowned at the tightly shut door, a flicker of suspicion crossing his face, then turned and left, plainly having come to check on things, wary that someone might take advantage of the troll's chaos to go after the thing hidden here. Iris kept watch a while longer and, seeing Quirrell make no further move, peeled away at Aris's command to check on Hermione and the others. By the time she arrived, the fight was all but over. In a wrecked bathroom, a great troll lay sprawled and senseless on the floor, while Harry, Ronald, and Hermione stood off to one side, still pale with lingering fear. Iris relayed the scene to Aris, and he nodded, reassured. Just as in the story, Harry and Ronald had reached Hermione in time, and the 3 of them had brought down the troll together, Ronald, in the end, felling it with a clumsy levitation charm that dropped the beast's own club onto its head. And so the friendship of the Golden Trio is forged, Aris thought, a small smile crossing his face. Whatever else had shifted with his arrival, this friendship, it seemed, had formed all the same. Perhaps some things were simply meant to be. He recalled Iris, satisfied that both matters were settled, and opened his eyes in the Ravenclaw common room. Around him, his housemates were still discussing the troll's sudden intrusion, the mood a mix of fright and excitement. I heard a troll broke into the school. How could a troll possibly get into Hogwarts? Frightening, thank goodness the professors dealt with it in time. Do you think someone let it in on purpose? The young wizards speculated among themselves, none of them imagining that the truth behind the troll's intrusion was far more sinister than any of them could guess, or that, on this very night, a first year in their own house had already, through a dragon's eyes, seen the whole hidden scheme laid bare. Aris said nothing. He only sat quietly in his chair, turning over what he'd just seen, his gaze slowly turning deep. It seems things are moving faster than I expected, he thought. I'll have to hurry, grow stronger, before the real storm arrives. After Halloween night, Aris grew more diligent still in his studies and research. He knew now that Voldemort's remnant, hidden within Quirrell, was after the Philosopher's Stone, and that meant the wizarding world's peace wouldn't last much longer. Though by the original story Voldemort wouldn't get the stone in the end, and would be driven off by Harry, Aris didn't intend to pin all his hopes on the plot running its expected course. His own arrival had already nudged events off their track in small ways. He couldn't rule out the chance of some unforeseen turn. The only real security lay in his own strength. And so Aris threw himself harder than ever into growing stronger. His meditation practice never lapsed a single day, his magic value climbed steadily higher. In class he kept farming his 3 daily quests, banking a tidy sum of academic points, which he spent chiefly on magic potions to push his magic value up faster. His research into the magic array pressed on as well, slow, but sure, drawing nearer bit by bit to the autocasting wand he envisioned. He also began, in his spare hours, to seek out more advanced magical knowledge. His command of the first-year curriculum had long since outstripped his fellow students. The ordinary lessons could no longer satisfy his hunger to learn. So he set his sights on the school library, and on that restricted section he'd wanted access to for so long. He knew there were a great many precious, advanced texts locked away in the restricted section, knowledge he needed badly just now. The trouble was, he still hadn't secured Dumbledore's authorization. Dumbledore had said that if Aris earned top marks across every course and won his professor's regard, he'd give the matter serious thought. On that count Aris had little doubt, after a stretch of study, he'd already won over nearly every professor who taught him. Looks like it's time I paid Professor Dumbledore another visit, Aris thought, a plan taking shape in his mind. Beyond that, he'd resolved to look into the Philosopher's Stone himself. Not that he meant to lay hands on it, he simply wanted to understand the whole affair, so that when the true crisis came, he wouldn't be caught unprepared. He recalled that the stone belonged to Nicholas Flamel, the famed alchemist, who'd lent it to Dumbledore for safekeeping. And Dumbledore had hidden it here, in Hogwarts, guarded by the enchantments of several professors together. If I could get a proper look at how the stone is protected, it might teach me a great deal, Aris thought. The defenses around the stone were the combined work of Hogwarts professors. Studying them would surely deepen his own grasp of magic. Of course, he'd no intention of forcing his way in now, that would only bring trouble. He meant only to learn what he could, quietly, and bide his time. As these thoughts turned over in his mind, Aris's days grew busier than ever. Between lessons, meditation, magic array research, and his study of more advanced magic, nearly every waking hour was spoken for. Yet he never felt it a burden, for he could feel himself growing stronger by the day, drawing ever closer to the goals he'd set. And that filled him with a quiet, steady satisfaction. Naturally, he didn't neglect Luna. However busy his days, he'd always find time to write to her, having Iris carry the letters back and forth. Luna's replies were his greatest comfort amid the press of study, reading of the small happenings in her days. Aris felt as though he could see that dreamy, gentle girl smiling before him, and all his weariness would melt away. In one of her letters, Luna wrote that she'd been studying hard of late, so she might answer his questions better when she came to Hogwarts. Reading it, Aris couldn't help a smile, warmth stirring in his chest. He knew the girl was working hard for his sake, and quietly resolved that when Luna came to Hogwarts, he'd take the very best care of her. And so, day by day, Aris's life at Hogwarts rolled steadily on. His strength grew, his knowledge deepened, his research advanced. Everything was moving in the direction he'd hoped. Before he knew it, the term was nearing its end, and Christmas was quietly drawing near. Christmas was another of the wizarding world's great festivals, and Hogwarts always kept it with much ceremony. As the day approached, the whole castle began to fill with a warm holiday air. The professors and students set about decorating, great fir trees appeared in the corridors and the great hall, hung with glittering ornaments and twinkling lights, until the mood was merry and bright. For Aris, though, Christmas meant something more. He'd promised Henry he'd return to the Shafik estate over the holiday, to meet, at last, the members of the Barton family who'd waited so long for him, and to see for himself the ancestral home of the house whose name he now carried. It's nearly time to go back, Aris thought, gazing out the window at the snow drifting down over Hogwarts, a flicker of anticipation rising in him despite himself. He wondered what that estate would be like, and what sort of people the Bartons, who'd guarded the Shafik legacy for half a century, would turn out to be. A few days before the Christmas holiday, Aris made his way, as planned, to the headmaster's office. Cockroach cluster. He spoke the password to the gargoyle guarding the office door, the one Dumbledore had let him overhear on his first night. The stone gargoyle slowly turned aside, revealing the spiral stair beyond. Aris climbed the stair and knocked at the office door. "Come in." Dumbledore's kindly voice sounded from within. Aris pushed the door open and stepped inside. Dumbledore sat behind his desk, a book in hand, and looked up at the boy with a smile. "Ah, Aris. I rather thought you'd come looking for me before long." "Good evening, headmaster." Aris nodded politely, then got straight to the point. "I've come, in fact, about that authorization for the restricted section." "Oh." Dumbledore set down his book and regarded Aris over his half-moon spectacles, a trace of amusement in his eyes. "And you believe you've met my conditions?" "I think so." Aris answered with quiet confidence. "Over this stretch of study, I've mastered nearly all the first-year material, and won the regard of every professor who teaches me." "I believe that's exactly what you asked of me, headmaster." "Haha, you're quite right." Dumbledore laughed. He'd long since had word of Aris's showing from the other professors, and knew the boy had, indeed, met his conditions. "Very well. I'll grant you access to the restricted section. But..." His expression turned a shade more serious. "There are books in the restricted section that touch on dark magic. I hope you'll bear one thing in mind, knowledge itself is neither good nor evil, what matters is how it is used. I trust you understand my meaning." "Of course, headmaster." Aris nodded earnestly. "I only wish to learn more, to make myself stronger, never to walk a crooked path." "Good. Then I'll trust you." Dumbledore nodded, drew a sheet of parchment from a drawer, wrote a few lines, and handed it to Aris. "Take this. With my authorization, you'll be free to consult the books in the restricted section." "Thank you, headmaster." Aris took the parchment, a flush of quiet pleasure crossing his face. This was exactly what he'd wanted. The restricted section's advanced knowledge would be an enormous help to his growth. "There's no need to thank me. A love of learning is a fine thing." Dumbledore smiled, then, as if remembering something, added, "By the way, Aris, I hear you'll be returning to the Shafik estate over the Christmas holiday." "Yes, headmaster." Aris nodded, unsurprised the old wizard knew of his plans. "I promised the members of the Barton family I'd go back and see them at Christmas." "That's good." Dumbledore nodded. "The Bartons have guarded the Shafik estate faithfully all these years, it's no easy thing. It's right that you go back and see them." He paused, and his tone grew a touch graver. "But do take care on the journey. You are, after all, the last Shafik heir, a great many eyes are fixed upon you. Should anything happen, send word to me at once." "I understand, headmaster. Thank you for your concern." Aris was quietly touched. Whatever else, Dumbledore's care for his students was genuine. After a few more words, Aris took his leave. Just as he reached the door, though, Dumbledore's voice came again from behind him. "Aris, one more thing." "Yes, headmaster." Aris turned back. Dumbledore looked at him, and after a moment's pause, asked, unhurried, "That question of yours, the nature of magic. Have you found your own answer to it yet?" The question caught Aris off guard. He thought for a moment, then shook his head with a smile. "Not yet. But I believe that one day I'll find it. And when I do, I'll be sure to tell you, headmaster." "Haha, very well. I'll be waiting. Dumbledore laughed, and waved him off. Off you go, then. And a happy Christmas to you. A happy Christmas to you too, headmaster. Aris smiled, then turned and left the office. Watching the boy's retreating figure, the smile slowly faded from Dumbledore's face, replaced by a thoughtful, complicated look. This child, he really is extraordinary. And precisely because he is, I must watch him all the more closely, and guide him well. I mustn't let him lose his way. He rose and walked to the window, gazing out at the snow drifting down over the castle, his eyes distant. Aris's question, the nature of magic, had, in truth, stirred him too. It was a question no wizard had ever truly answered. But something told him that the boy might, one day, be the one to find it. And when that day came, the wizarding world might change beyond all recognition. Perhaps, Dumbledore thought, the coming of this child is exactly what this world needs. He gave a soft sigh, his gaze slowly turning deep. Meanwhile, having secured his restricted section authorization, Aris was in high spirits. Parchment in hand, he made straight for the library, for he couldn't wait to see what precious knowledge that restricted section held. The Hogwarts library was one of the largest in the whole wizarding world, its towering shelves packed with countless volumes. And the restricted section, set apart at the very back of the library, roped off, forbidden to ordinary students, held the rarest and most advanced texts of all. Aris presented his authorization to Madame Pants, the librarian, who checked it carefully, then, with a look of some surprise, let him through into the restricted section. Plainly she hadn't expected a first year to secure the headmaster's leave to enter. Once inside, Aris felt as though he'd stepped into a treasure trove. The shelves were crowded with rare, advanced texts, many of them touching on dark magic, ancient magic, and other profound and dangerous knowledge. To Aris, all of it was precious beyond measure. He drew out a volume on ancient magic and leafed through it, and quickly found much within it that resonated with the contents of Merlin's notes. A quiet delight rose in him. Reading these books alongside Merlin's notes would surely deepen his understanding of ancient magic, and help his research into the magic array as well. With his photographic memory and speed reading, Aris tore through book after book at a furious pace, storing each one whole in his mind. He didn't dare linger too long, though, the term's end was near, and he had to make ready for his return to the Shofik estate. So he settled on committing the most valuable of the texts to memory first, to study at leisure later. Time slipped by. By the time Aris finally left the library, night had fallen. But he was thoroughly satisfied, for in these few hours, he'd memorized a great many precious texts, knowledge that would be an enormous help to his growth. The restricted section really is a treasure trove, Aris thought, well pleased. I'll have to come more often from now on. Over the next couple of days, Aris pressed on with his studies and research, while making ready for the journey back to the estate. Soon enough, the term drew to its close, and the Christmas holiday arrived. On the day the holiday began, most of the students left the school to spend Christmas with their families. Aris, too, packed his things and prepared to return to the Shofik estate. Aris, you're going home for the holiday? Terry asked, a little reluctant, watching Aris pack. There's something I have to see to. Aris nodded. Then have a lovely Christmas. Terry said. Will you be back once the holiday's over? Of course. I still have a great deal to learn here. Aris smiled. After saying his goodbyes to Terry, Anthony, and the others, Aris left the castle. Harry, he knew, would be staying at Hogwarts for the holiday, most of the Weasleys too. So he didn't seek them out to say farewell, he'd simply see them again after the break. Outside the castle, Henry was already waiting. Young master. The moment he saw Aris, Henry hurried forward, bowing respectfully, his face alight with joy. You've no idea how long everyone's waited for this day. When they heard you'd be coming home for Christmas, the whole family could scarcely contain themselves. Thank you for your trouble, Henry. Aris nodded with a smile. It's no trouble at all, serving you is my honor, young master. Henry beamed. Come, everything's ready. We can set off whenever you like. Then let's be off. Aris nodded. Henry drew out an old, worn boot and handed it to Aris. Young master, this is a port key. Take hold of it, and it will carry us straight to the estate. Aris understood at once. A port key was a wizarding means of travel, an object enchanted to whisk a person from one place to another in an instant. He reached out and took hold of the boot along with Henry. Ready, young master? Henry asked. The moment the time comes, the port key will activate. Ready. Aris nodded. A few seconds later, Aris felt a sharp tug behind his navel, and the world spun wildly around him. When his vision cleared, he found himself standing before a grand and ancient estate. Young master, welcome home. Beside him, Henry's voice came, warm with feeling. This is the Shafik estate, your true home. Aris looked up at the estate before him, and something stirred in his chest despite himself. Though this wasn't truly his home, though he was only a soul who'd crossed into this world, borrowing the identity of the Shafik heir, standing here now, gazing at the ancestral seat of the house whose name he carried, he felt an odd sense of belonging all the same. The Shafik estate was vast, its architecture grand and old, steeped in the weight of long years. High walls ringed it about, and a great wrought iron gate stood at its front, worked with intricate, mysterious patterns. Beyond the gate, a broad drive led toward the manor house, enormous, magnificent, every inch of it breathing the pride and glory of an ancient wizarding house. So this is the Shafik estate, Aris thought, a flicker of wonder rising in him. The home of the family whose name I now carry. He drew a deep breath, and something like anticipation kindled in him, for what awaited him beyond that gate, and for the members of the Barton family who'd guarded this place, and waited for his return, for 50 long years. As Aris and Henry approached, the great wrought iron gate of the estate slowly swung open of its own accord. Young master, please. Henry made a courtly gesture, inviting Aris inside. Aris nodded and stepped through the gate. The moment he did, a sight met his eyes that took him aback. Along both sides of the broad drive leading to the manor stood 2 long rows of people, neatly arranged, all of them in formal dress, their bearing respectful. The instant they saw Aris, every one of them bowed deeply, and a wave of voices rose in unison. Welcome home, young master. The sound rolled across the grounds, ringing with reverence and joy. There were old men and women with silver hair, and young men and women in the flush of youth, dozens of them in all, and every face shone with genuine delight and excitement. Aris was momentarily stunned. He hadn't imagined the Bartons would receive him with a ceremony this grand. Dozens of the family, lined up to welcome him home, the sight moved him despite himself. Young master, these are all members of the Barton family. Henry, at his side, introduced them with pride. For 50 years, generation after generation of us have guarded the Shafik estate, waiting for the day a master would return. And now, at last, that day has come. Listening to Henry, and looking at the Bartons ranged before him, their faces bright with joy, Aris felt something stir in his chest. He knew what these 50 years must have cost them. As stewards of the Shafik holdings, with every direct member of the family vanished, they'd had to guard a fortune that made the whole world envious, and bear, all the while, no end of pressure and temptation. That they'd kept faith for 50 years, never wavering, was a loyalty and devotion that commanded genuine respect. Thank you, all of you, for your years of hard work. Aris looked at the assembled Bartons and spoke sincerely, inclining his head to them. This wasn't mere courtesy, it came from the heart. Their loyalty and their labor deserved his thanks in full. At his words, a stir ran through the ranks of the Bartons. Many of the older ones had reddened eyes, some of the silver-haired elders were openly weeping. They'd waited 50 years for this day, and now that the young master had truly come home, and thanked them so sincerely. Every hardship of those long years seemed, in that moment, to have been worth it. "Young master, you're too kind." An old man stepped forward from the ranks. His hair was wholly white, his face deeply lined, but his eyes were sharp and clear, his bearing dignified. "Guarding the Shafik estate is the duty of the Barton family, and our honor. We ask no thanks, only that the young master has come home safe, and that is joy enough for us all. This is the eldest of the Barton family, and its head, Sir Alfred Barton." Henry introduced the old man to Aris. "Grandfather has watched over the Shafik estate the longest of us all. For 50 years, he never once left. Sir Alfred." Aris regarded the old man with respect and inclined his head. He could feel that this elder had given the greater part of his life to the Shafik house. A loyalty like that was worthy of anyone's regard. "Young master, you needn't be so courteous." Alfred smiled, and waved his hand. "Come, you must be weary from the journey. Let us go inside first. The family has prepared a feast, we mean to welcome you home properly. Then I'll trouble you all." Aris nodded with a smile. Under the Bartons' attendance, Aris walked toward the manor. As he passed between the 2 rows of them, each in turn bowed to him again, their faces warm with reverence and joy. Aris nodded to them as he went, and to some of the elders he offered a special word of thanks. His courtesy and his ease won the Bartons' hearts still further. In their eyes, this young master, for all his youth, carried himself with a poise and grace worthy of the Shafik name. The interior of the manor was no less grand than its exterior. High-ceilinged halls, floors of gleaming marble, walls hung with old paintings and portraits, every corner of it breathed the long history and deep foundations of an ancient wizarding house. Aris took it all in as he walked, and couldn't help a quiet sigh of wonder. The wealth and the standing the Shafik family had built up over the centuries was truly beyond imagining. Before long, they came to the manor's great dining hall, where a lavish feast had already been laid. The long table all but groaned under its dishes, every one of them exquisite, the rich aromas mingling in the air. "Young master, please, take the seat of honor." Alfred led Aris to the head of the table and invited him, respectfully, to sit. Aris didn't refuse. As the Shafik heir, this was his place by right. He seated himself at the head, and the members of the Barton family took their own places in turn, according to their seniority. Once everyone was seated, Alfred rose, lifted his glass, and looked at Aris, his voice warm with feeling. "Today, the young master has come home at last. This is the greatest joy the Barton family has known in 50 years. Let us raise our glasses, to the young master's return, and to the glory of the Shafik house, restored. To the young master's return. To the Shafik house restored." The Bartons rose as one, lifted their glasses high, and their voices rang through the hall, brimming with joy and hope. Aris raised his own glass and looked out over the members of the Barton family, and warmth filled his chest. In this moment, he felt, truly, that he had come home. The feast was a merry one. The members of the Barton family raised their glasses to Aris in turn, each telling him a little of themselves, some of how they'd guarded the estate over the years, some of what work they saw to for the Shafik house. Aris listened patiently to every one of them, and offered each a word of thanks. Through their talk, Aris gradually came to understand the Bartons better. The family was a large one, its members scattered across every corner of the Shafik holdings, each with a charge of their own. Some managed the family's various businesses, some safeguarded its properties, some handled its dealings with the outside world. It was thanks to their labor that the Shafik fortune had not only endured these 50 years, but even grown. "Young master, this is my son, Edmund." Henry drew forward a young man of perhaps 20 and introduced him to Aris. "He's been learning to help me manage flourish and blots of late. In future, he may well be at your service directly. Young master." Edmund bowed respectfully to Aris. He plainly took after his father, courteous in his bearing, and quick-witted about the eyes. "Hello, Edmund." Aris nodded to him with a smile. After that, Henry introduced several more of the younger Bartons to Aris. They were, without exception, outstanding young people, each with a skill of their own, and each deeply loyal to the Shafik house. Aris was quietly pleased to see it. With a family like the Bartons behind him, a great many things would be far easier to manage. As the feast wore on, and the mood grew warmer, Aris seized a quiet moment and asked, in a lower voice, about the family's present situation. "Sir Alfred, how do things stand with the Shafik house just now? Are there any troubles I ought to know of?" At the question, Alfred's expression grew a shade graver. He glanced about, then answered, low. "Young master, to be honest, the Shafik house has never wanted for troubles these years. The family's fortune is simply too great, no end of people covet it. Some have tried to seize our various holdings by force, others have sought to lay hands on the family's wealth by fouler means still. Were it not for a few safeguards the old masters left behind, and the whole family standing firm together, I fear the Shafik fortune would have been carved up long ago." "Safeguards the old masters left behind?" Aris caught on the phrase. "Yes." Alfred nodded. "Before they vanished, the old masters set a number of protections about the family's key holdings, the estate especially. Without a Shafik descendant to unseal them, no outsider can lay hands on those properties. That's the chief reason the Shafik fortune has held whole all these years." Aris nodded, understanding. So that was how the Shafik holdings had survived intact for half a century, for all the eyes fixed hungrily upon them. The old masters had plainly seen far ahead. Then, which families and figures have designs on the Shafik house at present? Aris pressed. "There are a good many, young master." Alfred's brow furrowed. "But the ones to watch most closely are several of the old pure-blood houses, the Malfoys chief among them. Old Lucius Malfoy holds real power at the ministry, and he's been eyeing the Shafik holdings a long while now. He's even joined with several other families of late, plainly plotting something against us." At the name Malfoy, Aris's eyes narrowed. He'd known already, from the dossier Henry gave him, that the Malfoys had designs on the Shafik house. And Lucius Malfoy telling his son Draco to befriend Aris, that, clearly, had been part of the scheme too. "I understand." Aris nodded slowly, a plan already taking shape in his mind. He wasn't afraid of the Malfoys, or of the other families circling the Shafik fortune. With his talent, and the strength of the Barton family, no scheme of theirs would come off easily. What he needed was time to grow strong enough that no one would dare covet the Shafik house again. "Young master, you needn't worry over much." Seeing the thoughtful cast of Aris's face, Alfred hastened to reassure him. "Whatever comes, the Barton family will stand at your side. We'll not let anyone harm you, or lay a hand on the Shafik holdings." "Thank you, Sir Alfred." Aris was quietly touched. "But this is a matter for us all to shoulder together. I won't let the Barton family bear it alone. From now on, I mean to grow strong as quickly as I can, strong enough that no one will ever dare covet the Shafik house again." At his words, a light kindled in Alfred's eyes, and he looked at Aris with mingled surprise and gratification. He hadn't expected the young master, for all his youth, to have such resolve and such mettle. It seemed the Shafik house truly did have hope of rising again in this young man's hands. "Good, well said, young master." Alfred nodded, warm with feeling. "With the young master's resolve, I've no doubt the Shafik house will return to its former glory, and stand once more among the great families of the wizarding world." The two of them talked on a while longer, and Aris came to grasp the Shafik family's present circumstances more fully still. He knew now that reviving the house would be no easy road, but he wasn't afraid. With his talent, and the loyalty of the Barton family, he was certain that one day he'd raise the Shafik name to a height greater even than before. As the feast drew to its close, the members of the Barton family took their leave of Aris in turn, and went off to their own quarters to rest. Henry, though, stayed behind, for he still had a great many things to tell his young master. Young master, there are some things about the Shafik house I think you ought to know. Once the others had gone, Henry's expression turned grave, and he began, in earnest, to lay the family's affairs before Aris. The Shafik holdings, it turned out, were even vaster than Aris had imagined. Beyond flourish and blots, the family owned a great many businesses across the wizarding world, apothecaries, magical goods shops, potion workshops, and more. It even held no small number of assets on the Muggle side. All of it, taken together, made the Shafik family one of the wealthiest houses in the whole wizarding world. Young master, these are the ledgers of the family's various holdings. Henry drew out a thick sheaf of documents and handed them to Aris. Every one of the Shafik businesses is set down here in detail. When you've the time, you may look them over at your leisure. Aris took the documents and leafed through them, and was quietly astonished. He'd known the Shafik house was rich, but not that its holdings ran quite this deep. With wealth like this behind him, there was a great deal he'd be able to do. Thank you, Henry. Aris nodded, then asked the thing he cared about most. By the way, is there any word yet of how the old masters vanished? Do we know what truly became of them? At the question, Henry's face darkened, and he shook his head slowly. Young master, to this day the fate of the old masters remains a mystery. All we know is that some 50 years ago, they suddenly disappeared from the wizarding world, without a trace. Some said they were killed by you-know-who for refusing to submit to him, others said they'd gone into hiding somewhere. But none of it was ever confirmed. You-know-who? Aris caught the name. Yes. Henry nodded. You'll know, young master, that 50 years ago the wizarding world suffered a terrible calamity. You-know-who rose to power, and a great many families were forced to take his side, those who refused met cruel ends. The old masters of the Shafik house were among those who would not yield, which is why some believe they were murdered by you-know-who. Aris frowned faintly. He knew the 50 years ago Henry spoke of couldn't be quite right. Voldemort's true rise had come rather later than that. But he didn't correct it, the wizarding world's records were often muddled, and small errors in the dating were nothing strange. What mattered was that the old masters had vanished for refusing to bow to a Dark Lord. That much, most likely, was true. The old masters of the Shafik house wouldn't submit to a Dark Lord, Aris thought. That means the family had backbone. And their vanishing, there may be more to it than meets the eye. He recalled what Dumbledore had said back at the start of term, that the old master's disappearance had involved some ancient magic bound up with time and space, a power even Dumbledore couldn't fathom. Set against Henry's account now, it only deepened the mystery. Time and space, the same power I carry, Aris thought, and something stirred in him. He remembered clearly that grey death magic he'd loosed at Ollivander's the day his wand was made, a power tied to time and space, one that hadn't come from Merlin's talent at all. And the old master's vanishing had involved ancient magic of time and space too. Were the two connected? The thought sent a small ripple through him. Could it be that my crossing into this world is bound up, somehow, with the old masters of the Shafik house? Aris turned it over, but with what he knew now, there was no untangling it. He could only file the question away, and wait for the day he grew strong enough, perhaps, to uncover the truth of it at last. Henry, is there anything left behind by the old masters at the estate? Journals, say, or letters, or anything of that kind? Aris asked. He hoped to find some clue to the old masters, and through it, perhaps, the truth of his own crossing. There is, young master. Henry nodded. The old masters left a fair number of things behind at the estate, books, papers, and the like. But some of them are sealed by magic, without a Shafik descendant to unseal them, they can't be opened. Now that you've come home, young master, perhaps you'll be able to open them, and learn something of what the old masters left. Hearing this, Aris's eyes lit up. If he could open the things the old masters had sealed, he might well find some clue, to the family, and to his own crossing both. Henry, take me to see the things the old masters left, would you? Aris said, unable to wait. Of course, young master. But it's late now, you're surely weary from the journey. Why not rest tonight, and I'll take you tomorrow? Henry suggested, with a considerate look. Aris thought about it and nodded. He was, in truth, a little tired, better to go tomorrow, refreshed. All right, tomorrow, then. Thank you, Henry. It's no trouble at all, young master. Henry smiled. Then rest well tonight. I'll come for you in the morning. With that, Henry bowed to Aris and withdrew from the room. Once he'd gone, Aris didn't sleep at once. He sat by the window, gazing out at the snow drifting down over the estate, his thoughts turning and turning. What had truly become of the old masters of the Shafik house? Was his own crossing bound up with them somehow? And that time and space power he carried, where had it really come from? Question after question circled in his mind, and try as he might, he could find no answer. It seems this Shafik estate holds more than a few secrets, Aris thought. Perhaps, here, I'll find the answers I'm looking for. The next morning, Aris rose early. After a simple breakfast, Henry came, as promised, to take him to see the things the old masters had left behind. Young master, this way, please. Henry led Aris through the manor's winding corridors, toward its innermost reaches. The deeper they went, the older and more solemn the surroundings grew. The walls here were hung with portraits of former Shafik masters, and as Aris passed, the figures in them seemed to turn their eyes upon him, as if sizing up this young descendant, only just come home. Young master, these are all portraits of the old Shafik masters. Henry explained as they walked. By the family's rule, every master, upon his death, leaves a portrait of himself in the manor, that later generations might remember them, and that they might, in turn, watch over their descendants. Aris nodded, and studied the portraits along the walls. Every face in them carried the pride and dignity peculiar to the Shafik house, and something more, a depth, a mystery, as though each had held secrets beyond the telling. Before long, Henry brought Aris to a great, tightly shut door. It was wrought of some unknown black material, its surface graven with intricate, arcane patterns that gave off a faint, mysterious magic. Young master, beyond this door is where the old masters kept the things they left behind. Henry gestured to it. But the door is sealed by the old master's magic. Only a Shafik descendant can open it. For 50 years, none of us has ever set foot inside. Aris looked at the great sealed door, and something stirred in him. He could feel the powerful magic radiating from it, and, faintly, a pull, as though it were calling to him. He stepped forward and laid a hand upon the door. The instant he touched it, the arcane patterns across its surface flared with light, and a strange magic wrapped around his hand, as if reading the blood that ran in him. A moment later, the light gathered and formed a rune upon the door, the very same rune, Aris realized with a start, that had appeared when he'd sealed his pact with Iris. A rune bound up with blood. Then, with a low, grinding rumble, the great sealed door slowly swung open. It's open. The door's actually open. Behind him, Henry stared, thunderstruck. 50 years this door had stayed shut, and none of the Bartons had ever seen what lay beyond it. Now, at the young master's touch, it had opened at last. The sight left Henry shaken to the core. Aris drew a breath and stepped through the door. Beyond it lay a spacious chamber, and the moment he entered, magical lamps along the walls kindled of themselves, lighting the room from end to end. It was a study. Shelves lined the walls, crowded with old books and papers, a great desk stood at the center, and upon it lay a scattering of documents and curious objects, as though the room's owner had only just stepped out. A fine layer of dust covered everything, silent testament to the 50 years it had stood undisturbed. So this is the study the old masters left behind. Aris looked slowly about the room, and something moved in him. 50 years this study had stood sealed, waiting for a Shafik descendant to return and open it. And now, at last, he had come. He stepped to the desk and looked over the papers upon it. Most were written in an ancient script he couldn't read, but with the strange power of Merlin's notes to aid him, their meaning gradually surfaced in his mind. The papers, it seemed, were the old master's records of their study of magic, and among them, no small amount concerning the magic of time and space. So the old masters really did study time and space magic, Aris thought, his heart beating faster. It only lent more weight to his guess. The old master's vanishing was surely bound up with that magic. And his own crossing into this world, that too, perhaps, was tied to it. He read on, and the more he read, the more astonished he grew. The old master's grasp of time and space magic ran deep indeed. There were records of how one might, through such magic, glimpse the past and the future, even, perhaps, cross between different worlds. Cross between different worlds, Aris thought, and a jolt ran through him. Could my coming to this world truly be the old master's doing? The thought sent his heart pounding. If it were so, then his crossing was no accident at all, but something the old masters had, somehow, brought about. He pressed on through the papers, hoping to find more clues. But most of the deeper matters had, it seemed, been recorded elsewhere. These papers held only fragments. Even so, they were enough to tell Aris one thing: the old masters of the Shafik house had attained a mastery of time and space magic beyond anything he'd imagined, and their vanishing was, beyond doubt, bound up with it. It seems the secrets of the old masters aren't to be unraveled so easily, Aris thought, setting the papers down and looking about the study once more. There had to be more clues hidden here somewhere, he need only find them. His gaze came to rest, at last, on a locked drawer in the great desk. Something told him that what he sought might well lie inside. Aris walked to the desk and reached for the locked drawer. It too was sealed by magic, but the moment his hand touched it, the seal recognized the Shafik blood in him, and with a soft click, the drawer slid open. Inside lay a letter, and an old book. Aris took up the letter first. It was addressed, in an elegant hand, to the descendant of the Shafik house who opens this drawer. His heart gave a jolt. This letter, it seemed, had been left for him, or for whichever Shafik descendant should one day come. He opened it and read. The letter was, indeed, written by one of the old masters, and its contents left Aris shaken to his core. The old master wrote that the Shafik house had, for generations, studied the magic of time and space, and had attained through it a mastery beyond the reach of ordinary wizards. But this magic was as perilous as it was profound: meddle with the fabric of time and space carelessly, and one might bring down calamity. And so the old masters had always guarded the secret closely, never letting it pass beyond the family. Then, 50 years ago, the wizarding world had fallen into calamity, and a dark lord had risen. The Shafik masters of that day, refusing to bow to him, had drawn his enmity. Knowing they could not withstand the Dark Lord's power, and unwilling to let their mastery of time and space magic fall into his hands, the old masters had made a desperate choice: to use that very magic to seal themselves away, hidden somewhere in the folds of time and space, waiting for the day a worthy descendant might wake them. So that's what became of the old masters, Aris thought, staring at the letter, his heart in tumult. They hadn't been killed, nor simply gone into hiding. They'd sealed themselves away within time and space itself, to keep their magic from a Dark Lord's grasp. He read on, and what followed shook him harder still. The old master wrote that if their line should one day be in danger of dying out, the family's time and space magic held a final safeguard, one that could summon a soul from another world entirely, and bind it to the Shafik bloodline, to carry on the house. Reading this, Aris felt as though he'd been struck by lightning. Summon a soul from another world, and bind it to the Shafik bloodline. Wasn't that exactly what had happened to him? He'd crossed into this world, taken on the identity of the Shafik heir. Was he, then, the very soul the old master's safeguard had summoned? So my crossing really was the old master's doing, Aris thought, his heart pounding. It was no accident at all. The old masters had, through their time and space magic, reached across the void and drawn his soul here, to carry on the Shafik house. The realization left him reeling. He'd always taken his crossing for the work of the system, never dreaming it might, in truth, be the old master's design. And if it were so, then his coming to this world was no chance at all, but a thing the old masters had wrought. But if the old masters summoned me, Aris thought, frowning, then what of the system? Where did it come from? He'd always believed the system the root of his crossing, but now it seemed the old master's magic was the true cause. So what, then, was the system? And why had it appeared in him? Question upon question rose in his mind, and he could find no answer. He set the letter down and took up the old book beside it. Its cover bore a single line in that same ancient script, Records of Time and Space. Records of Time and Space. Aris's heart stirred. Could this book hold the Shafik family's study of time and space magic? He opened it, and, with the power of Merlin's notes to aid him, the ancient characters within slowly yielded up their meaning. Sure enough, the book set down the Shafik family's research into the magic of time and space, how it might be used to glimpse the past and the future, to seal a thing away within time and space, even to summon a soul from another world. So this is the Shafik family's time and space magic, Aris thought, and a fire kindled in him. If he could master the magic in this book, then not only might he grow far stronger, he might, one day, find the old masters, and wake them from where they slept. And more than that, with a grasp of time and space magic, he might at last unravel the riddle of his own crossing, and the mystery of that grey death power he carried, the power bound up with time and space that had never come from Merlin's talent at all. It seems this trip home has been worth it indeed, Aris thought, holding the records of time and space, a quiet fire in his eyes. He'd found the answers he sought, and, with them, a new path forward. From here, his road lay clearer than ever before. He carefully stowed away the letter and the records of time and space, then took one last look around the study. There might be more secrets hidden here still, waiting for him to uncover, but that could wait. What mattered most now was to study the time and space magic in this book, and grow stronger, as fast as he possibly could. Over the days that followed, Aris shut himself away in the old master's study, poring over the records of time and space. The time and space magic set down in the book was profound and abstruse in the extreme, far harder to grasp than any ordinary magic. Fortunately, Aris had the aid of Merlin's notes, and his own formidable talent besides. Slowly, bit by bit, he began to make sense of it. He came to understand that time and space magic was among the most powerful, and most perilous, of all the branches of magic. With it, one might glimpse the past and the future, fold space to travel vast distances in an instant, even seal a thing away within the folds of time itself. But the magic was correspondingly dangerous. The slightest misstep might tear the fabric of space, or entangle the caster in the currents of time, with consequences beyond imagining. Precisely because it was so dangerous, the Shafik family had always guarded the knowledge closely, never letting it pass beyond the line. And the old masters had wielded it to seal themselves away within time and space, a testament to just how deep their mastery had run. Aris studied the records of time and space with everything he had, and his understanding of the magic grew, little by little, deeper. He came to see, too, that the grey death power he carried was, in truth, a kind of time and space magic, a power that could accelerate the flow of time upon an object, aging it in an instant, withering it to dust as though 1,000 years had passed in a breath. That was why, at Ollivander's, he'd reduced the test puppet to ash with a single stroke. So that's what that power was, Aris thought, and a light of understanding kindled in him. He'd never grasped, before, where that grey death magic had come from, or what its nature was. Now, with the records of time and space to guide him, he understood at last. It was a manifestation of time and space magic, very likely a gift the old masters had left within him when they summoned his soul across the void. The realization set his heart racing. If the grey death power truly was time and space magic, then with study he might wield it far more freely, and even, in time, master the deeper arts the old masters had known. He threw himself harder still into the records of time and space. The days slipped past, and his grasp of time and space magic deepened by the day. Though he was still a long way from wielding it as the old masters had, he'd already begun to make simple use of that grey death power, to age a small object, hastening its decay. One evening, as Aris sat absorbed in the records of time and space, a voice suddenly sounded in the study. "So, a descendant of our house has come home at last." Aris started, and looked up sharply. The voice had come from a portrait upon the wall. It showed an old man in the dress of a bygone age, silver-haired, his face deeply lined, but his eyes clear and sharp, his bearing grave and commanding, every inch the master of an ancient house. "You are." Aris looked at the old man in the portrait, and a suspicion rose in him. "I am an old master of the Shafik house." The figure in the portrait regarded Aris, and gave a slow nod. "By the family's rule, every master, upon his death, leaves a portrait of himself in the manor. And I am one such portrait, left here to await the return of a descendant. An old master of the Shafik house." Aris's heart stirred. He hadn't imagined the portrait would truly hold the thoughts and memory of one of the old masters. "Child, you've read the records of time and space, then?" the figure asked, his eyes falling upon the book in Aris's hands. "Yes." Aris nodded, then asked the thing he most wished to know. "Elder, I've read the letter the old masters left. Was my crossing into this world truly the old master's doing?" At the question, the figure was silent a moment, then nodded slowly. "So, you are the soul summoned by the family's last safeguard." It seems the Shafik house had, indeed, come to the very brink of ruin. Hearing this confirmed from the old master's own portrait, Aris felt his heart clench. So my crossing really was the old master's design. He was, truly, the soul their final safeguard had summoned across the void, drawn here to carry on the Shafik house. "Elder, then can you tell me, where are the old masters now?" Aris pressed. "The letter said they sealed themselves within time and space. Is there any way to wake them?" The figure in the portrait sighed. "Child, the old masters sealed themselves within the folds of time and space, to keep the family's magic from a dark lord's hands. To wake them is no easy thing, you would need a mastery of time and space magic deep enough to reach the place where they sleep, and undo the seal that holds them." He looked at Aris gravely. "And that will require you to grow far, far stronger than you are now." Aris nodded slowly. He'd guessed as much. To wake the old masters, he would have to master time and space magic, and for that, he needed to grow stronger still. "Elder, I understand." Aris looked at the figure in the portrait, resolve in his eyes. "I will study time and space magic with everything I have, and grow strong enough to wake the old masters, and restore the Shafik house to its glory." At his words, something like gratification kindled in the old master's eyes. "Good. A worthy descendant of the Shafik house." The figure in the portrait nodded, satisfied. "Child, since you mean to study time and space magic, I can offer you some guidance. Though I am only a portrait, I retain the memory and knowledge of my living self. On the subject of time and space magic, I may be able to help you." "Thank you, Elder." Aris was overjoyed. To have an old master's guidance would speed his study of time and space magic beyond measure. And so, over the days that followed, Aris studied the records of time and space under the old master's portrait's tutelage. With the old master to guide him, his progress was far swifter than before. A great many passages he'd found impenetrable now came clear under the old master's patient explanation. Time and space magic, he came to see, was built upon a wholly different foundation from ordinary magic. Where ordinary magic worked changes upon the material world, time and space magic worked upon the very fabric of time and space itself, which was precisely why it was so powerful, and so perilous. The least carelessness might tear that fabric, and the caster would be first to suffer for it. Under the old master's guidance, Aris's grasp of time and space magic deepened by the day. He learned to make freer use of the grey death power, to accelerate time upon a thing, aging it in a breath, and, conversely, to slow time upon a thing, staying its decay. Though these were only the first, simplest applications of time and space magic, to Aris they were a treasure beyond price. "Child, your talent is truly extraordinary." Watching Aris master the arts so quickly, the old master's portrait could not hide its astonishment. In all the history of the Shafik house, there have been few with a gift for time and space magic to match yours. It seems the family's last safeguard summoned exactly the right soul. "You flatter me, Elder." Aris smiled. In truth, he knew his swift progress owed much to Merlin's notes, and to the talents the system had given him. Without those, mastering so profound a magic in so short a time would have been impossible. At the thought of the system, Aris remembered the question that still nagged at him, and asked the old master's portrait. "Elder, I've a question I'd like to put to you. When the old masters summoned my soul across the void, did they place anything else within me? Some special power, perhaps?" He was thinking of the system. He wanted to know whether it, too, was something the old masters had left in him. At the question, the old master's portrait fell silent a while, then shook its head slowly. "Child, when the family's safeguard summoned your soul, it did indeed leave the seed of time and space magic within you, that grey power you carry. But beyond that, I know of nothing else. If there is some other power in you, it did not come from the Shafik house." Hearing this, Aris frowned faintly. So the system truly hadn't come from the old masters. Then where had it come from? The question circled in his mind, and still he could find no answer. If the system didn't come from the old masters, Aris thought, then where on earth did it come from? And why did it appear in me? He'd always taken the system for the cause of his crossing, but now it seemed the old master's magic was the true cause, and the system something else entirely. So what, then, was it? The riddle only deepened. "Child, is something troubling you?" The old master's portrait seemed to notice the change in Aris's face. "It's nothing, Elder." Aris shook his head, setting the matter aside for now. Whatever the system truly was, it had done him nothing but good. There was no need to fret over it just yet. What mattered most was to study time and space magic, and grow stronger, as fast as he could. He put the system out of his mind and returned to the records of time and space. Under the old master's guidance, his grasp of the magic deepened further still, and his strength, too, was climbing at a pace that astonished even him. The days passed. The Christmas holiday was drawing to its close, and it was nearly time for Aris to return to Hogwarts. "Elder, the holiday's almost over, and I must go back to Hogwarts soon." One evening, having finished his study of the records of time and space, Aris looked to the old master's portrait. "May I take the records of time and space with me, to study at school?" "Of course." The old master's portrait nodded. "The records of time and space is the Shafik family's own. As a descendant of the house, you may take it wherever you will. But mind you keep it safe, this book must never fall into an outsider's hands. Should the time and space magic within it pass to the wrong person, the calamity that followed would be beyond reckoning." "I understand, Elder." Aris nodded gravely. He knew perfectly well how dangerous the time and space magic in the book was. He'd guard it with the utmost care. "Good. Then take it, and study it well." The old master's portrait nodded. "When your mastery of time and space magic is deep enough, come back here, and I'll teach you the deeper arts. And one day, when you're strong enough, you may go and wake the old masters, and restore the Shafik house to its glory." "I will, Elder." Aris nodded firmly, resolve blazing in his eyes. On the last day of the Christmas holiday, Aris made ready to return to Hogwarts. "Young master, must you leave so soon?" The members of the Barton family had gathered to see him off, plainly reluctant to let him go. "There's still a great deal I must learn at Hogwarts, so I have to go back." Aris looked at the assembled Bartons and explained gently. "But don't worry, I'll come home to see you all again when I've the chance. Young master, do take care of yourself at school." Sir Alfred looked at Aris, his voice warm with feeling. "Should you ever need anything, you've only to send word, and the Barton family will do all in its power to help you. Thank you, Sir Alfred. Aris nodded. And I'll trouble you all to look after the estate while I'm away. You needn't say it, young master. Guarding the estate is our duty. Alfred smiled. After his farewells to the Bartons, Aris left the estate with Henry, and by portkey returned to Hogwarts. Young master, here we are. As they arrived outside the castle, Henry looked at Aris, reluctant to part. Do take care of yourself at school. And should anything happen, send word to me at once. I understand, Henry. Thank you for your trouble. Aris nodded. It's no trouble at all, serving you is my honor, young master. Henry smiled. Then I'll take my leave. Mind you look after yourself. With that, Henry bowed to Aris, and by portkey departed once more. Watching Henry go, Aris drew a deep breath, then turned and walked toward the castle. This trip home had gained him more than he'd ever imagined. He'd learned the truth of his crossing, come to know the Shafik family's time and space magic, and won the guidance of an old master's portrait. All of it would be an enormous help to his growth. From here, I must study time and space magic even harder, and grow stronger as fast as I can, Aris thought, resolve kindling in his eyes. Only by growing strong enough could he wake the old masters, restore the Shafik house, and, one day, unravel the riddle of his own crossing, and the mystery of that system he still couldn't explain. Back at the castle, most of the students who'd gone home for the holiday had already returned. The halls were lively once more. Aris, you're back. The moment he entered the Ravenclaw common room, Terry and Anthony came hurrying over. How were your holidays? Aris asked with a smile. Wonderful. But not half as interesting as yours must have been, surely. Terry's eyes shone. Did anything exciting happen at home? Nothing much, just went back and saw some family. Aris smiled and shook his head, giving nothing away. He'd no intention of telling anyone what had truly happened over the holiday. The secret of the Shafik family's time and space magic, and the truth of his own crossing, were things he could share with no one. After a while chatting with Terry and Anthony, Aris returned to his own dormitory. He summoned Iris out of the pet space, and the little red dragon, freshly out, sprang at once into his arms, chattering away, plainly telling him how she'd missed him over the days apart. All right, I know. Iris missed me. Aris stroked the little dragon's head, smiling. Through their bond, he could feel Iris's joy, and it warmed him. Once he'd settled Iris, Aris took out the records of time and space and began, once more, to study the time and space magic within it. With the old master's portrait to guide him over the holiday, his grasp of the magic had deepened greatly. Now he could press on with his study on his own. The days settled back into their rhythm. Each morning Aris rose early to meditate, tempering his magic, then came his lessons, and his 3 daily quests, farmed off the professors as ever, and in his free hours he shut himself away in the room of requirement, studying time and space magic now, alongside his research into the magic array, and his reading in the restricted section. His strength climbed steadily. With his meditation, the points from his daily quests, and now his study of time and space magic, his magic grew stronger by the day. And his grasp of the Grey Death power deepened as well. He could wield it far more freely than before, accelerating time upon a thing, or slowing it, near as he pleased. His research into the magic array advanced too. Slow as the going was, Aris never thought of giving up. He knew that once he cracked the array, his strength would take a genuine leap, and that autocasting wand he envisioned would be one step nearer to reality. And of course, he didn't forget Luna. However busy his days, he'd always find time to write to her, having Iris carry the letters. Luna's replies were his greatest comfort amid the press of study. And so, in this steady, purposeful way, Aris's life at Hogwarts rolled on. His strength grew, his knowledge deepened, his research advanced. Everything was moving in the direction he'd hoped. He knew the road ahead would be long, and far from smooth. But he wasn't afraid. With his talent, the loyalty of the Barton family, and the guidance of the old master's portrait, he was certain that one day he'd grow strong enough to wake the old masters, to restore the Shafik house, and to face whatever storms the future might bring. The road ahead is long, Aris thought, gazing out the window at the snow drifting down over Hogwarts, quiet resolve in his eyes. But I'll walk it, one step at a time, and grow stronger with every step. After the Christmas holiday, Aris's days at Hogwarts settled once more into their steady rhythm, though he had a new pursuit now, the study of the Shafik family's time and space magic. Every day, in whatever spare hours he could find, he shut himself away in the room of requirement and pored over the records of time and space. With the grounding the old master's portrait had given him over the holiday, his study went far more smoothly than before, and his grasp of time and space magic deepened by the day. He could wield the Grey Death power far more freely now. He could accelerate time upon a thing, aging it in a breath, or slow time upon it, staying its decay. Simple as these applications were, they were the foundation of time and space magic, and once he'd mastered them thoroughly, the deeper arts would follow. Of course, Aris didn't neglect his ordinary studies either. Though his grasp of magic had long outstripped his fellow first years, he knew that laying a solid foundation was no bad thing. And with his 3 daily quests to farm off the professors, sitting through their lessons was hardly a waste of time. That morning, Aris's first class was Potions, taught by Professor Snape, head of Slytherin. Potions was one of the classes the young wizards dreaded most, chiefly because of the professor who taught it. Snape was famously severe, and notoriously biased toward his own Slytherins. Students of the other houses had a hard time of it in his class. Sure enough, no sooner had the lesson begun than Snape swept into the room, his black robes billowing, his face cold as ever. His dark eyes raked across the young wizards, and the whole classroom fell silent on the instant, none daring to make a sound. There will be no foolish wand-waving or silly incantations in this class. Snape's voice was low and cold, yet it carried to every corner of the room. As such, many of you will scarcely believe this is magic at all. I don't expect you to truly appreciate the beauty of a softly simmering cauldron, its shimmering fumes, the delicate power of liquids that creep through human veins, bewitching the mind, and snaring the senses. As Snape spoke, the young wizards listened in rapt silence. Aris, though, watched the professor with a thoughtful look. He knew Snape's story well, knew the cold, forbidding exterior hid a deep and complicated tale. This was a man who'd sacrificed a very great deal. Shafik. Snape's cold gaze fell suddenly upon Aris, and his voice cut through the room. Since your talent is so exceptional, perhaps you can tell me, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? The whole class turned to look at Aris. Plainly Snape meant to make things difficult for him. That question was hardly one a first year would know. But Aris only smiled. He knew the answer, of course. Professor, that would make a draught of living death, a very powerful sleeping potion. At his reply, Snape's eyes flickered, a trace of surprise crossing them. He hadn't expected Aris to answer so readily. But his expression didn't ease, instead he pressed on. And where would you look, if I asked you to find me a bezoar? A bezoar is a stone taken from the stomach of a goat, Professor. It will save one from most poisons. Aris answered without hesitation. Snape's eyes flickered again. This time, the surprise in them was harder to hide. And what is the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane? Snape asked a third question, his tone cold as ever, but with a subtle change beneath it. There is no difference, Professor. Monkshood and wolfsbane are the same plant, also known as aconite. Aris answered, calm and composed. At that, the classroom fell utterly silent. Every one of the young wizards stared at Aris in astonishment. 3 questions, each one difficult, and he'd answered every one flawlessly. Even the Slytherins, who'd been waiting to see Aris humiliated, were struck dumb. Snape said nothing for a long moment, his dark eyes fixed on Aris, something unreadable moving in their depths. He'd meant to catch the boy out with those questions, to take this famously gifted first year down a peg. But Aris had answered all three without the slightest hesitation, and perfectly. It was more than Snape had bargained for. Correct. After a long silence, Snape spoke at last, his voice cold as before, though it had lost a little of its earlier edge. 5 points to Ravenclaw. It seems, Shafik, that you are not entirely without substance. The whole class was quietly stunned. Coming from Snape, who never gave points to anyone outside his own house, a word of praise, however grudging, was rarer than rare. After the questions, Snape set the young wizards their first task, to brew a simple potion, a cure for boils. He gave a brief demonstration of the method, then had the students try it for themselves. As they worked, he prowled the classroom, his cold gaze sweeping over each cauldron, ready to pounce on the smallest mistake. Longbottom. Snape's voice rang out suddenly, cold and sharp. Did I not tell you to take the cauldron off the fire before adding the porcupine quills? At the Gryffindor benches, a plump, timid-looking boy had gone pale with fright. He'd added the porcupine quills without taking his cauldron off the flame, and the potion inside was already hissing ominously, on the point of boiling over. The boy was Neville Longbottom, famously clumsy at potions. Vanish it, now. Snape strode over and, with a wave of his wand, cleared away the ruined brew before it could bubble over and scald anyone. Then he rounded on Neville, his voice icy. And you, a point from Gryffindor, for your carelessness. Neville hung his head, not daring to make a sound. Aris watched the scene and shook his head inwardly. Just as in the story. Neville and potions really don't mix. But he didn't intervene. This was, after all, Neville's own lesson to learn. He turned back to his own cauldron and set to brewing in earnest. With his knowledge of potions, and his exacting control of magic and of heat, a simple cure for boils was no challenge at all. He measured each ingredient with precision, added them in their proper order, and governed the flame just so. Before long, the potion in Aris's cauldron had taken on exactly the color the recipe described, a clear, faint blue-green, perfectly clean, without the least impurity. Plainly it was a flawless brew. As Snape prowled the room, his gaze fell upon Aris's cauldron, and something flickered in his eyes. He walked over, looked closely at the potion within, and even leaned in to catch its scent. The longer he looked, the more the surprise in his eyes deepened. The potion was perfect. Its color, its consistency, its very smell, every one of them exactly as they should be. Even among his own senior Slytherins, few could brew a cure for boils this flawless. And Aris was a first year, and this his very first potions lesson. Not bad. After a long moment, Snape spoke, his tone cold as ever, though something in it had shifted. A flawless cure for boils. 5 points to Ravenclaw. The whole class stared, thunderstruck. Snape, who never gave points to any house but his own, had now given Ravenclaw points twice in a single lesson, both to Aris. It was unheard of. The Slytherins in particular looked as though they'd seen a ghost. They knew better than anyone how demanding their head of house was, for Snape to praise a student of another house, twice, was a thing they'd scarcely have believed had they not seen it themselves. Aris only smiled, unruffled by Snape's praise. He'd known his potion would pass, a simple cure for boils was nothing to him. At the end of the lesson, just as the young wizards were filing out, Aris made his way over to Snape. Professor Snape, I have a question I'd like to ask. Aris seized his moment. Snape looked at him, a flicker of surprise crossing his eyes. He hadn't expected Aris to come to him with a question, most students gave him as wide a berth as they could. Speak, he said, his tone cold but not unwilling. It's this. I've been thinking about potion making, Aris said, appearing curious. A potion's efficacy seems to depend on the quality of its ingredients, the precision of the brewing, and the skill of the brewer. So I wondered, Is there any way to make the same potion more potent still? To push it beyond the limits of the standard recipe? The question caught Snape's interest. This was a matter he'd studied deeply himself, and few students ever thought to ask such a thing. He considered a moment, then began to explain to Aris in earnest, detailing several ways a potion's potency might be heightened, even sharing a few insights of his own. Congratulations, daily quest progress 1/3, 300 academic points obtained. Listening to the system's chime in his mind, Aris nodded along, feigning revelation now and then, while Snape, seeing the boy hang on his every word, found himself, almost against his will, telling him more than he'd intended. By the time Aris left the potions classroom, Snape stood a while, watching the boy's retreating figure, an unreadable look in his dark eyes. That child, he really is no ordinary student. Snape had taught for many years, and met no shortage of gifted students, but one like Aris, so gifted, and yet so genuinely, humbly eager to learn, he'd never seen before. Despite himself, he found his estimate of the boy quietly rising. I'll have to keep an eye on that one, Snape thought, then turned and swept back toward his office, robes billowing behind him. That evening, in the headmaster's office, Snape had come to see Dumbledore, to speak of Aris. Headmaster, that Aris Shafik really is no ordinary student. Snape's tone was cold as ever, but the words themselves were praise. In my potions class today, he answered 3 difficult questions flawlessly, and brewed a perfect cure for boils on his very first attempt. His grasp of potions is astonishing, better, in some respects, than a good many of my senior students. Oh. Dumbledore looked at Snape over his half-moon spectacles, a trace of interest in his eyes. He knew well enough how demanding Snape was, for him to praise a student, and one outside his own house, was a rare thing indeed. It seems this child truly has surprised us all. There's more, Headmaster. Snape went on. After the lesson, he came to me with a question, about how a potion's potency might be heightened. His thinking was sharp, and his interest genuine. I've taught many years, and never met a first year like him. Dumbledore was quiet a moment, then nodded slowly. Severus, it seems you think well of this child too. I wouldn't go so far as that. Snape's expression cooled. I merely find him interesting. But talent alone means nothing. What matters is the path he chooses to walk. You're right, of course. Dumbledore nodded, his gaze turning thoughtful. That is exactly what I've been giving thought to. This child's gifts are extraordinary, precisely why we must guide him with the greatest care, and see he doesn't lose his way. Snape said nothing to that. But something flickered in his dark eyes, plainly, he too had his own thoughts on the matter of Aris. After Snape had gone, Dumbledore stood a long while at the window, gazing out into the deep night, his eyes unreadable. One by one, the professors have taken notice of this child, he thought. Flitwick, McGonagall, Sprout, even Severus, every one of them speaks well of him. His talent truly is a thing to marvel at. But precisely because of that, I must watch him all the more closely. The lesson of Grindelwald was never far from his mind. He could not let another gifted wizard walk that same crooked road. Meanwhile, Aris knew nothing of the professor's quiet discussions over him, nor would he have paid them much mind if he had. His days went on as steadily as ever, meditating each morning, farming his daily quests in class, and shutting himself away in his free hours to study time and space magic and press on with his research into the magic array. His strength grew day by day. With his meditation, the points from his quests, and his study of time and space magic, his magic climbed without pause. And his grasp of the grey death power deepened steadily, he could wield it far more freely now, accelerating or slowing time upon a thing near as he pleased. His research into the magic array advanced as well. After a long stretch of study, he'd finally worked out the trick of guiding his magic to inscribe the array, and had begun, at last, to trace a true, functioning one. Though he was still away from completing the whole spell-storing array, this was real progress. Once he cracked it, his auto-casting wand would be within reach. One day, as Aris crossed the grounds after class, he happened to see several students flying about on broomsticks over the Quidditch pitch, weaving and diving through the air with obvious delight. Quidditch, Aris thought, pausing to watch. He remembered the sport well, the Wizarding World's most popular game, played on flying broomsticks. In the original story, Harry had made the Gryffindor team as a first year, the youngest seeker in a century, and become quite the little star. He watched a while, a flicker of interest stirring in him. He'd never flown a broomstick before, it looked rather fun. But he soon set the thought aside. He'd no time for Quidditch just now, his days were full to bursting with meditation, his studies, his time and space magic, and his magic array research. There was no room to spare for the sport. Perhaps I'll give it a try when I've the time, Aris thought, then turned and made for the room of requirement. He still had his time and space magic to study, and his array to work on, those were what mattered most just now. As he walked, though, a thought crossed his mind. He recalled that this was about the time, in the original story, when Harry played his first Quidditch match, the one where Quirrell had jinxed his broom, trying to throw him off and kill him. If the plot held to its course, that match would be coming soon. I ought to have Iris keep a closer watch on Quirrell, Aris thought, his eyes turning thoughtful. Though he judged Harry unlikely to come to real harm, it did no harm to be careful. And keeping an eye on Quirrell's movements would help him better gauge what Voldemort's remnant was truly planning. With that, Aris quietly sent word to Iris through their bond, bidding the little dragon watch Quirrell more closely still, and step in at once, should anything truly go wrong. Before long, the day of the Quidditch match arrived, Gryffindor against Slytherin, the season's first. It was a grand occasion, nearly the whole school turned out to watch. The stands ringing the pitch were packed with students of the four houses, their cheers rolling across the grounds in waves. Aris came too, taking a seat in the Ravenclaw stand. He wasn't especially interested in the match itself, he'd come chiefly to keep an eye on Quirrell. He remembered clearly that in the original story, it was during this very match that Quirrell had jinxed Harry's broom, trying to throw him off and kill him. The match began. The players of both teams shot into the air on their broomsticks, chasing the quaffle and dodging the bludgers, the play fierce and fast. Harry, as the Gryffindor seeker, soared high above the rest, his eyes scanning the pitch for the golden snitch. Aris, though, paid the match itself little mind. His gaze was fixed on the staff stand, where Quirrell sat, and where, through Iris's eyes, he was watching the man's every move besides. Sure enough, before long, Quirrell began, quietly, to make his move. His lips moved in a low, unbroken murmur, his eyes fixed unblinking upon Harry high in the air. It was a jinx, one meant to throw Harry from his broom. High above, Harry's broomstick had begun to buck and lurch violently, swaying wildly beneath him, as though it meant to hurl him off. He clung on with both hands, struggling to keep his seat, his face taut with fright. The crowd gasped. Many thought Harry had simply lost control of his broom, none guessed that someone was jinxing it from below. But two people knew the truth. One was Hermione Granger, who, just as in the original story, had spotted Snape muttering, his eyes fixed on Harry, and taken him for the culprit. She was, at that very moment, making her way stealthily toward the staff stand, meaning to stop him. The other, of course, was Aris. He knew the real culprit was Quirrell, not Snape. In the story, Snape had in fact been murmuring a counter-jinx, trying to protect Harry, and Hermione, mistaking him for the attacker, had set his robes alight in her attempt to stop him, breaking his concentration by chance and, in the confusion, disrupting Quirrell's jinx as well. That was how Harry had regained control of his broom. The story's running true to course, Aris thought, watching the scene unfold. He wasn't especially worried, he knew Harry would come through it safely. Still, to be certain, he had Iris keep her invisible watch close over Harry, ready to step in the instant anything truly went wrong. Sure enough, events played out much as the story had them. Hermione reached the staff stand, and in her haste to stop Snape, set a small fire at the hem of his robes. Snape, feeling the heat, broke off his muttering in surprise, and in the sudden commotion among the professors, Quirrell's concentration was broken too. High above, Harry's broom steadied at last, and he clambered back astride it. Aris let out a small breath. So it holds, after all. Whatever small changes his own arrival had wrought, this scene, it seemed, had run its course unchanged. The match went on. Harry, back in control of his broom, quickly spotted the golden snitch and gave chase. After a spell of frantic pursuit, he closed his hand around it at last, nearly swallowing it in the process, and won Gryffindor the match. The Gryffindor stand erupted in cheers, the students wild with joy at their victory. Harry, clutching the golden snitch, was mobbed by his teammates, the hero of the hour. Aris watched the celebrations, a faint smile crossing his face. This match had gone just as the story had it. Harry had come through safe, and won the game besides. Now that everything was settled, he needn't linger. But just as he made to leave, he caught, through Iris's eyes, a curious sight. On the staff stand, Quirrell, his jinx broken, his scheme foiled, wore a look of plain frustration and unwillingness. And then his gaze swept, seemingly by chance, across the Ravenclaw stand, and came to rest, for the briefest instant, upon Aris. It lasted only a moment, the next, Quirrell had looked away. But that fleeting glance set Aris frowning. Did he sense something? Or was it only chance? He couldn't be sure. But one thing he knew, he'd have to be more careful still. That man beneath the turban, and the master hidden with him, were no ordinary threat.
Hello everyone! As we wrap up this video, I want to share a quick note. I have a Patreon account. If you'd like to support me and enjoy on-demand audiobooks, you can become a Patreon member. Alternatively, you can check out my Google Drive link, which has 500+ novel audiobooks available through my Ko-fi or Patreon shop. I appreciate your support.